So I'm sure you guys have been waiting on me to start these. The Resident Evil franchise is without a doubt the most popular, most important, and most beloved horror game IP in existence. There are many other good ones, but Resident Evil remains on the throne at the top of the list of what sells the best. And like just about any franchise that grows and expands in different eras, with that comes change and evolution over time. As that happens, you gain people and you lose people. Some will love what you've done in the present because now you've piqued their interest with changes. And others will hate change and long for what you've had before. I've been on both sides of this fence with various franchises, ranging from loving the new action-oriented Final Fantasy games and not really caring for the old ones, to loving the old Assassin's Creed games and hating the direction the newer RPG-focused ones take. If those of you who are familiar with my old Let's Plays kinda wonder why I just abruptly stopped playing Assassin's Creed around the time of Syndicate, it's because I did not care for the massive overhaul that Origins made to the franchise, and so I lost interest. And that simply is what it is. It's the nature of things. Every human being's taste is different. We're gonna bicker, we're gonna fight. Sometimes we like changes, sometimes we don't. So, before I start this, I believe in pure transparency in where my biases are when it comes to this franchise. Because I plan to go through every mainline entry and a few spin-offs that matter to the lore and timeline. I don't believe there is such a thing as an quote-unquote objective review. No matter who you are and how you try to present yourself in regards to gaming discussions, analyzation, and criticism, it simply doesn't exist. I don't give a fuck if you're Mauler, I don't give a fuck if you're Luke Stevens, Chris Davis, Sphere Hunter, Avalanche Reviews, or whoever the fuck. Your preferences for what you like in games are going to poke their head through in your work. That is unavoidable, so I don't even bother with that, putting on that facade. I just keep it real and I tell you what I do and don't like. That being said, my ultimate goal with these discussions is to be fair to these games, regardless of what my preferences are. I don't want people clicking on my videos because they think I'm just another make-believe objective analysis channel, but just a real-ass dude that loves video games. I want people to click on my videos because they know what a game is like, know what my biases are, and what I do and don't like, and wonder what I think of something. Have it in their mind like, oh, I can't wait, he probably hated this, or loved that. So I'm going to tell you up front, I've never been the biggest fan of the original classic era in Resident Evil. I like it, it has its charms, but I don't have the nostalgia boner a lot of people that look at these games do because this isn't my childhood era. It's a complicated situation considering Resident Evil runs in the family. You see, my mother loved the classic era as a teenager. It was her favorite franchise. She had me in her teens and Resident Evil actually debuted the year I was born, so all while I was growing up, this is the kind of shit she was playing. Resident Evil, Silent Hill, the works. My introduction to Resident Evil was Resident Evil 4. And that entire era it started is what I grew up with. I literally begged her for a Nintendo GameCube for this specific game because Capcom swore this was a GameCube exclusive, where she wasn't exactly a fan of it because of how different it was. What Resident Evil 4 did with the over-the-shoulder camera, the aiming, the action, the laser sight and all that, nobody was really doing that quite yet, and it was about a year before everything that Resident Evil 4 set in motion started to take shape and become the mandatory standard, so this was all weird and foreign to her. There was no Gears of War yet, no The Last of Us, which is funny because she loves this game to death, and no really rules to say this is what shooters are at baseline yet. Get with the program or get left behind. That took about a year or two of people scrambling to overhaul their games to play like Resident Evil 4 because this game was so revolutionary. Whereas my sister, much like how I used to not be willing to touch any classic Resident Evil game that isn't action horror, still won't. I bought her the remakes of 2 and 3 under the impression that they've been touched up and are modern enough to keep her interested, and that shit still wasn't enough. She hasn't touched them since I bought them. They're just not the kind of Resident Evil she likes, but of course, she enjoys the remake of 4 just fine. It is what it is. Resident Evil is liked by different people for different reasons, and this kind of divide will always exist. The first time I laid eyes on any sort of classic Resident Evil game was over a cousin's house. The PlayStation 1 version of 2 was a 2-disc game, and Leon was on disc 1 and Claire is on the other. So naturally, loving Resident Evil 4 and Leon, I get a chance to play it, I loaded it up, and was immediately turned off by everything. The graphics, the controls, the camera, I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? So in the midst of that, I'm not familiar with the classic survival horror gameplay type of trying to avoid enemies versus the challenge coming from engaging with them like Resident Evil 4 had conditioned me to do. So in between dying over fumbling with all of this shit, running out of ammo, I finally make it to the RPD, and the final straw for me was when I walked into the hallway with this liquor and had nothing but a pistol, and my health is already low and it instantly killed me. Mind you, I have no idea how to save yet, because these are old games with no checkpoints, and I must have missed the typewriter and the shit graphics. And after getting this far, finally, and then dying and having to restart from the beginning again, I took this shit out, we went back to playing Resident Evil 4 on his GameCube, and I was so disgusted by whatever the fuck this was supposed to be, I didn't touch any Resident Evil game pre-4 for about 9 more years. And don't get me wrong, I played other survival horror games just fine, like Obscure, and I dabbled a bit in Silent Hill, but pre-Resident Evil 4 was kind of like a turnoff for me. So, eventually, I came around and I tried them once more around the time I was around 17-ish, but for a very long time, I thought this era was dog shit until I warmed up to it. And it took a very long time before I really started to appreciate it. And if my generation thought this shit was old, these games have to be absolutely painful to generations after me, because I'm late 20s now. I've been in the arguments where we're all eating each other alive on fan pages over what the games do and don't suck for years. And believe me, this discourse isn't brand new to me. It's why I jab at Avalanche Reviews and similar channels so much. They're from that era that I and others like me constantly bicker and fight with on forums, and that muscle memory has me ready to battle at all times. Especially because when you win the tug-of-war, it's fun to talk shit. There's a nostalgia I have for the forum arguments and discourse, even describing it to you. But that's neither here nor there. My job here is not actually to try to beg and convince you to play these classic games, and it's not to try to convince you that you shouldn't play them either. It's to look at each game in this era and ask the question if it's even worth it to go back to. And if you do go back to it, what are the problems you might encounter? What's the good shit that'll make you want to stick with it while you're encountering these problems? What I think is good about it, what I think is bad about it. Hell, I even have to convince myself that these are even worth revisiting. Only one of these games is still commercially available, and it's the one that Capcom doesn't seem to give a fuck about at all. Only available through backwards compatibility in both cases. No new updates, no new graphical features. Barely acknowledged, like an unwanted child. They just disrespectfully skipped it in regards to remaking the games. I'm here to talk about if you're willing to figure out how emulators work, how to get these games to work, how to make them look a little more presentable. What do you get for the effort? What's good or what's bad, and what does and doesn't work in a modern gaming world? You might ask why I would examine old games under a modern lens. And to that I would say, because again, I keep shit real and this is the real fucking world. And we don't live in La La Land where I can pretend these games haven't been completely replaced in Capcom's eyes that are more accessible to a modern audience. Especially in the case of 2 and 3. I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not going to bullshit you, and I don't believe in trying to examine games in a vacuum where decades of future never happened. Because it makes your nostalgia feel good. Especially because these games are often hailed as some of the greatest ever made. The problem with which being, when you say ever made, that means ever made. As in, no matter what time, people generations long after us will load something up and have a good time and it will hold up. So, to look at these games, of course, we have to start from the beginning, with the original. the father of survival horror, Resident Evil 1. The grandfather being alone in the dark, but that's a video for another time. From here on out, as always, spoilers galore all over the place. So this is your warning to back out now. This is also your warning that with some of the stuff I have to say, some of you aren't going to like me very much, and others will resonate and like me very much indeed. So this is your second warning that if you're soft as baby shit, it's time to bail out of the video. Resident Evil 1 starts us off by introducing us to STARS, the elite SWAT unit for Raccoon City Police Department, deployed to investigate a series of murders in the woods. There are two teams, Alpha and Bravo. Bravo was sent in before Alpha, but have disappeared with no contact, so Alpha is out looking for them. Alpha team is comprised of two of the playable characters, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine respectively, as well as weapons expert Barry Burton, Albert Wesker, the team commander, and Joseph, who does whatever the fuck he does, because this motherfucker will be dead in about 3 seconds anyway. Being attacked by zombie dogs, everyone is forced into a nearby mansion. Two things you'll notice before you even have control of your character are, 1, the cheesy campy action hero vibe just off the dad rock intro with the goofy flames and shit. I mean, just look at Wesker. This motherfucker is posted up in the dead of night with his hair slicked to precise and shades in pitch black darkness. And we will later find out he even does all of his scientific research in them. Look at this shit. Prime action hero material, clearly inspired by things like Predator and Evil Dead. I'm bringing this to your attention now because as this series goes on, if you've ever fucking listened to an older Resident Evil friend bitch and moan about how action movie the newer games are, the seeds were already planted right around the beginning. They were always cool action hero types from the start. Don't let these motherfuckers lie to you. The second thing you'll notice is the fucking atrocious voice acting. It is rough, man. I'm not gonna pretend it's not. I can't take this shit seriously when this is the average performance we get from the biggest villain in this franchise day one. But here's the thing. A lot of people tend to write off this entire era as having shit voice acting, but I'd argue it's really only the first game here. There's a couple stinkers in Resident Evil 2 too, but they're minor briefcases with like 2 lines. By the time of Resident Evil 3, they've cleaned up a lot of the performances. I mean, I know I said 2 things you'll notice right off, but yeah, let's go ahead and rip this band-aid off now. The game also looks like shit. Now, like I said, I am fair, but the obvious is the obvious, and I'm not going to pretend my eyes don't work. This is a game from 1996. It's aged like milk left out in the sun. Again, what I find interesting here is that just like what you'd expect out of just about any console generation, as it ages, as more games are made, as developers understand the tech more, the games look better and better as well. You'd be surprised just how good Resident Evil 2 and especially Resident Evil 3 look if you can upscale them and clean up a lot of the weird shit that PlayStation 1 games had going on. Just trying to load these games up raw, they're going to look ugly. They're going to warp and contort anytime something moves, and it's going to take a little work in configuring on your part to research how to fix. And I think that is another thing that makes these games so hard to come back to or try out in the first place for people. Asking people who aren't already into it to fumble around emulators just to play these old games that they might not like, and then ask them to do a bunch of extra shit to make it look presentable is a tall order. But trust me, don't let these low resolution 2D backgrounds fool you. The stuff that's 3D models fool you. There's a lot of detail in these games art-wise that's actually very impressive for the time it came out. The problem is just that they hadn't quite figured out this 3D thing until this era's midpoint. So while you can save Resident Evil 2 and you can save Resident Evil 3 and make them look pretty good for their time, there is no saving Resident Evil 1. It in particular is always going to be chunky and blocky. You'll get used to it, of course, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that even after fixing these games up and making them look as good as it's probably going to get, after playing through them all, I didn't go back and look at my footage of Resident Evil 1 versus Resident Evil 3 in absolute disgust. You ever played Tekken 1 after playing Tekken 3? Same feeling. Going from what the fuck is that to, okay, it's starting to look human. In the case of Resident Evil 1, just about the only thing impressively modeled today are the item inspections in the status menu. And for some reason, Jill's slobber knockers. Yeah, it's crazy to say, it feels like all the game's polygon budget went into these. Remember, Tomb Raider debuted on this same machine, and Laura's chest spent the entire life cycle of the PS1 looking like this in-game. And here Jill is with a banging chest on the same machine. Shinji Mikami made sure to get these right. This is all before you get control though. Once that happens, that's its own can of worms we'll open in a second, but I want to at least get to where the game opens up first. Initially, like I said, when you started, you picked either Jill or Chris. Each character has strengths and weaknesses that are supposed to balance out in that Chris has more health, but has less item slots, while Jill is the opposite. What this actually translates to is Chris just being twice as fucking annoying to play. I think this is another mistake that a lot of people make because they don't know any better, but Chris isn't exactly harder than Jill, he's just more tedious. And most people are going to want to play as Chris because that's Chris motherfucking Redfield. The fact is, which is unarguable, that Chris is only second to Leon in franchise popularity and recognition, but probably the most important in regards to what he accomplishes. Resident Evil 5 was Capcom's highest played, best-selling Resident Evil for almost a decade and a half after its release, and he and Leon are the stars of the CGI movies, and he plays important roles in games that he doesn't even star in. Games will be about completely different characters, and Capcom will put Chris over like Roman Reigns to come save the day. Jill has done some cool shit, sure, but she's not on that level, and I don't give a fuck if Twitter fan accounts get mad that I said it. Facts are facts. But playing as Chris as a new player is a recipe in punishment and a test in patience because he has to deal with some bullshit. In this game, he is absolutely fucking retarded. He can't read music, nor can he mix chemicals, so a lot of key moments, someone else, mostly Rebecca, the only surviving member of Bravo team, will have to come save his ass by doing something for him so that he doesn't die. On the flip side, Jill has a much smoother experience in this game. Barry babies her through basically everything. She can get the shotgun early without having to deal with the trap. If Chris gets poisoned while fighting the giant snake, Rebecca can cure it but doesn't really heal him. And to my knowledge, she can only briefly heal you while she's still in the save room you meet her in. But she changes locations pretty much as soon as you meet her if you're making progress. Barry, on the other hand, will heal her to full health. What kind of bullshit is that? Jill also gets an extra weapon in the form of the grenade launcher she can pick up off a dead Bravo team member. Chris technically gets his own weapon in the form of a flamethrower, but it is one specific area in the game, runs out of ammo extremely quickly, takes up 2 slots of his fucking 6 total, and don't you believe me, we're gonna talk about that shit. And you don't even get to fucking keep it. You have to put it back later. Jill has no such problem with the grenade launcher. It's simply an extra tool to help her in addition to the shotgun and the fucking magnum. Can you believe this shit? Male privilege my ass. So anyway, depending on who you start the game with, either Chris gets separated from the group and Jill goes to look for him, or Barry gets separated from the group and Chris goes to look for him. This is where we stumble on the first zombie with the iconic head turn, and right about here is where the game kind of fucks you depending on who you picked, because if you picked Chris, he dropped his gun on the way in the mansion, so he's stuck with his knife. This is all assuming you went and equipped anything in the first place, because the game starts you with absolutely no fucking weapon in your hand. Nothing. This is a problem that the remake completely fixes, and that's going to become a recurring theme when it comes to the negative stuff in this game. The remake fixes a lot of its problems. Don't worry though, the remake will get its own video later. But we're talking about the original for now. And in the original, yeah, it kind of screws you right from the beginning. Because one of two things happen. You either get to this zombie and get blindsided by not being able to fight back because you didn't know you needed to equip something yourself, or as Chris, you try to fight this thing with a fucking knife. And I tested this on purpose because I wanted to see what that was like. And as you would imagine, it's not very pleasant. And I can feel it now. Some dickhead is cracking his fingers ready to type in my comments, well, actually, people complete this entire game with the knife. Shut the fuck up. So, right off the bat, the game has likely annoyed the fuck out of somebody and given them a bad impression because of reasons I'm going to get to in just a second. You're probably already missing a good chunk of health. What you should do optimally is trigger the cutscene and run away, because when you get out, either Barry will kill it for you, or you can come back as Chris and kill it in just a second. Chris or Jill walks back in the main hall and everyone is missing. The only thing left for Chris is Jill's gun, and for Jill, well, Barry's still here to babysit her through most of the game, but most of the time from here on out, he'll split up and search on his own. Rebecca will do the same once Chris finally meets her. But mostly from here on out, the game opens up, and it's up to you to figure out what goes where and how to tackle things. And speaking of tackling things, before we progress any further, it's time to go ahead and address the major issues with the game. I promise you, I do like this game. Not as much as the other ones, but I do like it. But we do need to get the bad shit out of the way and address what doesn't work for people and why it's not really attractive in the modern mainstream market. There are some big elephants in the room to address, and I don't even know where to begin because of how fucking massive some of these roadblocks are. It's overwhelming how much shit I need to discuss, because what makes classic Resident Evil so niche and unapproachable to the average gamer today isn't really one singular issue or system. It's how each system combines with one another, even if there are solutions to one specific problem. For starters, we have the divisive and infamous tank controls. I fully understand why people don't like them, because I'm not a fucking Neanderthal caveman pushing 40 to 50 years old. They can definitely feel weird and uncomfortable. Eventually, you can get used to them. The more you play, you'll be using them just fine. But it never really feels precise, simply manageable, simply tolerable. But there will still be times, even 2 or 3 games in, where you're moving around, turning a corner, or trying to get around something, where you turn your shoulder into a wall or something, and have to course correct. Because turning in every game is not the same speed. It's not just the movement that's sluggish either. Aiming is sluggish too, so what often happens is you walk into a room and run into the faster, more dangerous enemies, and before your character can even pull up their weapon, it has time to run up and hit you. Especially problematic with hunters, who typically show up at about the midway to late game point in the average Resident Evil game. You simply cannot move as fast as some of the later creatures do, and even if you can visually react, nothing you can do will make your character physically react as fast. But I don't think it's really the controls themselves causing most of the issue here. More so, the next issue, and that is the camera angles and the controls are a double dose of uncomfortable that you have to learn to deal with. Most Resident Evil games, with the exception of Code Veronica, place 3D objects on 2D backgrounds. Your character moves within these backgrounds, and they're all drawn from different perspectives or angles that you move along, usually just referred to as fixed camera angles. And this, combined with the tank controls, are usually the bigger problem people have with these games. These games fucking love to put enemies out of view of whatever camera angle you approach the threat is actually able to be seen in. This feels fucking horrible, and it will happen constantly. The amount of times I've been walking along unable to see what the fuck I can hear, only to walk directly into something's jaws, has got to be insane, to the point where I couldn't help but have that thought creeping in the back of my mind like, this shit would never happen in the new remakes. I want to go play that. Constantly fighting that desire to have a better experience. Some will defend this to death as adding tension. Bitch, what the fuck is tense about me not being able to see the zombie that I clearly know is there? I can hear it, I just can't see it. Chris, Jill, Rebecca, Leon, and everyone else can see it just fine. I can't because of where some dickhead placed the camera. Nothing about me getting grabbed or killed because I can't see is scaring me. This is why, even though Resident Evil 4 also has tank controls, it barely even registers in your brain that it does, because you can fucking see what the character you're playing as sees. And I hear the defense for it now. Well, if you can hear them but not see them, just wait for them to come into view. 4 things wrong with that. 1, it's fucking stupid. 2, it doesn't even always work because the AI can be a little dense about pathfinding, so sometimes it can get stuck on a corner for a little while. And if you play like that, you'll be waiting quite a bit relying on the artificial intelligence from 1996 to finally get to you. 3, it's just fucking boring to play like this. I'm standing here like a fucking asshole because I can't see. Do you understand me? I can't see. You walk in a couple of rooms like this, sure, I'll play along, no big deal. But if you want to experience every classic mainline Resident Evil title, you have to deal with this shit like 6 times on a per game basis. That's like hours and hours and hours of walking into rooms and just standing here shooting at air, assuming that you're hitting something that you can't see from the angle you're shooting at in a game about conserving your fucking ammo. You can make this a little more bearable with auto aim, but that requires you to know what the fuck is up with that, which we'll have to get to later. Fourthly, it's at odds with what the games want you to be doing. Let me reiterate, repeat, hammer this in one more time. You're shooting blind in a fucking game about saving ammo. Let's do some quick math. The PlayStation 3, my favorite gaming generation, came out in November 2006. Classic survival horror, as it is here, was basically dead and buried by this point. Knowing me, by the time I have this video ready to go, it'll be November again or close to it. Damn, now that I'm getting ready to record this long after writing this script, that's actually pretty fucking accurate. Anyway, that means that it's 2023. Someone born in 2006 would be 17. And remember, we are now on the PlayStation 5. That is 3 generations of gaming that they've all known to play like this. Now, do you understand how difficult it is to look that kind of person in the face and tell them, yeah, so you should be conserving ammo like you would in any other horror game and making your shots count, but the game uses fixed camera angles and you will often have to shoot things that you just can't see. That shit doesn't even go together saying it out loud, and I actually like these games. Even outside the realm of shooting shit, there are a lot of hallways where trying to avoid enemies by moving around them, with the fucking tank controls, might I remind you, is extremely difficult on its own. Now, the general game plan that people will tell you is to be smart about when you want to fight or when you want to run past everything. And my counter response to that is, how the fuck is the player even supposed to assess whether they should fight or flight when they can't even see the room and assess the danger to decide what they want to do? A room or hallway could have 1 or 2 enemies that you can get around if you're smart about it. Or it could be a fucking shitload of them. If the camera isn't facing them, and it usually won't be, you have no way of knowing until you decide either to wait for everything to get close enough to where it won't even matter what you could have done, or get in closer to try to get a better look at things and force the camera to shift. But doing that risks you running face first into whatever the fuck was in the room anyway and getting grabbed because you couldn't see how close or how far away it was. And you better hope it was a zombie, because here is issue 5. The hit stun and invincibility. Zombies in these games are just about the only thing you can ever really shoot whenever you want, regardless of what state they're in. Falling or getting up, it doesn't matter. You can shoot them whenever you want. Sometimes they fall and play dead, wait for you to walk by and take a chunk out of your ankle. You can tell when they're dead or not because they pull blood on the floor if they're down for good. If they're still alive, a lot of times their head will move and track you from the ground to give you a hint. That's how it will work all the way through this era's life cycle. Pretty cool and manageable, right? Well, basically nothing else works like that. Dogs, hunters, basically everything else will fall to the ground and cannot be dealt any kind of damage until they get back up and recover. Now, dogs become tedious at best to deal with due to this. Combined with the camera angles, as you stand somewhere laning and they get knocked constantly out of camera shot over and over, with your only indication that they're fully up and ready to be shot again is that they might feel like growling before they run at you again. That's at best. At worst, they're not all coming from you at the same angle. So you're sitting here wrestling with the camera trying to juggle everything's iframes. And the more dogs there are, the more they can get close to you while you're shooting at something else. Now, most people seem to like when I play clips of things I'm talking about, but I do get a few that complain about it, and to that I say tough fucking tits. So here's what it looks like to deal with dogs in best case scenarios. Looks tedious, like it's doable, but is dragging out way longer than it should constantly, right? Now imagine doing that for 4 fucking games in a row for hours and hours. And that was dogs, the weakest enemy to deal with. If you've got something else stronger like a hunter or chimera on your ass, it is 10 times worse. You can knock one of these down and think, oh okay, as soon as this fucking thing gets up and is out of its iframes, I'm gonna blast it. Joke's on you, as soon as it gets up, it could be vulnerable again, or it could decide it just wants to leap into the air. If it does that, the shot you just took is worthless because the nanosecond it decides it wants to leap, it is completely invulnerable to standard blasts. You have to have predicted that it will jump instead of charge at you so that you can aim up in the air and hope to hit it. If you guess wrong, you're getting hit. Especially if they're not in camera shot after you knock them down. Oh, but you? The game doesn't give a fuck about you. Enemies can gangbang you Sunday to Saturday, and all you can do is try to get out of a bad spot. Mind you, again, this is all why the camera angle constantly shifts over and over as you try to make an escape, which I almost forgot to mention, micro freezes the game anytime the camera needs to load a different angle. And that's the more merciful of the issues. The less merciful, again, revolves around faster dynamic enemies later in the game. Hunters, for example, can jump behind you if they miss. So what can happen is one jumping behind you while another is in your face before you even have time to run. Time to turn around perhaps, time to raise your gun or anything. You're getting fucked and you can do absolutely nothing about it besides pray that when you get out of stun lock, the game presents you with a small window long enough to get an opening to do something. It feels fucking awful when this happens. So we've bitched about a lot of shit here and for a good reason. You want to see what it looks like when almost everything I just mentioned is at its absolute worst. Having to shoot blind, sluggish controls, bullshit iframes. Here, I'll show you. I got fucked here as soon as it got up. I took aim and it was so fast compared to me I couldn't even aim, let alone try to wrestle with these tank controls to turn out of the fucking way. Then I shoot it and now I need to guess when it gets up because I can't fucking see. And just like that, I'm dead. Oh yeah, did I forget to tell you that the hunters have an instant kill attack that they can basically just do whenever the fuck they feel like it. In later games, it will be nerfed to where they only really do it when you're in caution or below, but in this game, they can do it whenever. I had almost full fucking health when I walked through this door. It did not matter. That's the kind of bullshit you have to deal with when it comes to this game. And the list of bullshit to deal with, especially for new players, just keeps going. Guys, I promise you, I do actually like these games. I do. But I have to tell you fully about what you're getting into and what to look out for and be aware of. I've watched plenty of retrospectives and reviews that look back at old school Resident Evil, and just about the only person that's even mentioned some of this more problematic shit outside of just the tank controls and the camera is probably Avalanche Reviews. But because he's fucking ancient, he can only address this shit from the perspective of someone who loved these games day one. I'm giving you the perspective of someone who had to learn to love these games, despite their age and issues, even in their day of release. All of the hurdles I had going from Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 all the way back in time to 1, 2, and 3 the first time I played them, they're going to be even bigger hurdles. Remember, it wasn't until Resident Evil 6 that a mainline, non-spin-off Resident Evil lets you move and shoot at the same time. That's its own problem that we'll touch on when we get to that era, because by this point, Capcom was just being fucking hard-headed and dumb. But it's a little easier to adjust when you're still used to shit like that. But Resident Evil is past even that now. It's been letting you move and shoot for the longest. Meanwhile, Silent Hill was letting you move and shoot on the PS1. Capcom was just being fucking Capcom. Speaking of damage, these games won't tell you until Resident Evil 3 in-game how to deal with getting grabbed if you're new to this. You'll likely assume you need to mash the action button to escape, but you need to mash everything, not just the action button. I'll cut the game some slack here because I'm too young to have played these games on the original hardware to know what the manuals in the box said, but old enough to remember that games did used to have physical manuals in them, in the PS2 and some of the PS3 era. But most of the games never tell you this. So what can happen is you taking significantly more damage than you need to take off of grabs. Like in Resident Evil 1, Chris can take more punishment than Jill, right? Like way more. But if you don't know any better, you can be down to danger in like 2 zombie bites. And that can give you the wrong impression about how punishing damage in this game really is. It's not anywhere close to that bad, but if you get grabbed by something without knowing to mash all the buttons, you'll go back to the status menu and be like, what the fuck kind of damage is that? Just another roadblock when it comes to getting into this game. Another issue is ammo. See, a common misconception when it comes to classic RE is that it just doesn't give you enough ammo. That's true and also kind of untrue. Untrue in that when you play these games enough times, you actually start to see that they give you a shit ton of ammo. Especially by the end of the game. I have so many shotty and magnum rounds, I couldn't possibly use all this. but true in that the early game, especially in RE1, can be really fucking dry on ammo drops. With the combo of how the camera angles don't let you even see what you're shooting at, a lot of times the ammo can be scarcer than it was ever supposed to be if things don't go your way. Not helping this is the fact that the PS1 era of RE games exclusively used to fucking hide unseeable, undetectable ammo drops on dead bodies or random spots in the backgrounds constantly. Ammo that is very important and can be the difference between your playthrough continuing and being soft-locked and you writing the games off as outdated trash. All because you had no idea that pistol bullets were behind some fucking trash can in a city or on the first dead body you see. The decision to do this was a mistake. One that they know they made because by the time of Resident Evil 3 they do this less often, and by the time of Code Veronica it is almost completely gone. Someone is probably sure as shit typing some 200-word essay in the comments rushing to the game's defense on how it was done for technical limitations and blah 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 blah. I'm calling complete horseshit. Because I'm looking dead at physical, invisible, in-world ammo drops with my own two eyeballs right now as I type this. This was absolutely a stupid idea, and one that the remakes will correct in one way or another. But I also mentioned the auto-aim system helps with a lot of these issues. And I want to touch on that because I feel it is absolutely the most important difference between these games being playable and enjoyable and just being fucking unbearable. See, Resident Evil 1, for whatever reason, didn't launch in the US with auto-aim. I think the Japanese original had it, but the westernized version had it removed. This is one of the weird mini Capcom decisions they make when they used to release or re-release things to different platforms or regions, but yeah, it didn't have it, and it is a dreadful experience. In a game short on ammo and stopping power in its first few hours, imagine trying to shoot at shit you can't see from a lot of angles and just hoping you're hitting your target. Imagine trying to pivot your character around dogs and hunters moving twice as fast as you and still moving while you're trying to turn and aim. Yeah, fucking terrible. And what often happens because nobody tells them otherwise is when somebody decides to emulate these games and try them out to play RE from the beginning, they grab the shittiest version of RE1 by mistake, which is the original US release without the auto-aim, and they have such a bad time they either swear off this franchise entirely or skip right up to Resident Evil 4 to keep going from there. What you want to do is grab either the director's cut or the DualShock version with the auto-aim intact. It is a game changer. It can be the difference between these games feeling so uncomfortable you just can't put up with them and being just comfortable and manageable enough to know that you can power through and get to the fun stuff. Only problem is there used to be stupid shit like the auto-aim not being set to the default control scheme until about Resident Evil 3, even though it's literally the same control scheme as default, just with a change aim button. So remember, if you're going to play Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil 2, grab the DualShock versions and remember to switch the control scheme to Type C. Only problem with RE1's original DualShock version is the absolutely botched soundtrack. I'm not going to open that whole can of worms, but yeah, this version had its soundtrack molested. But this is the future, baby. We have technology. You can find the ultimate Resident Evil 1 version, which is an edited ISO hack that not only fixes the soundtrack, but uncensors the intro movie the way most versions are. And it's pretty easy to find online. Enjoy Resident Evil at its best, with all of the strengths and none of the weaknesses that the other versions have. Unless you're one of those weirdos like Avalanche Reviews or something that absolutely must play the game on original hardware, then I guess you're just kind of fucked. But you kind of do that to yourself. The last of the major issues spanning the entire era up until 4 is the ink ribbons. The fucking ink ribbons. I can wave most of the issues off. Any of what I've mentioned can understandably make these games unapproachable to modern audiences, but can be put up to varying degrees. But I personally, for me, fucking hate the ink ribbon system. I despise the ink ribbon system. These are how you save. If you play these games the proper way without using save states, that is, which I definitely recommend you do because fuck that shit. One of my biggest pet peeves with games is when they do not respect my fucking time. And the very idea of ink ribbons is about disrespecting your time. It's why these games don't do this shit anymore. This is a major advantage that Silent Hill had over Resident Evil, outside of a better inventory system too, that just lets you pick up what you want to pick up. If you don't have one, you cannot save, period. Listen, I can give a game the time that I can give it, when I can give it, and when I can't give it anymore for the rest of the day because I need to head to work, or I need to go on a date, or hit the gym, or something, or it's time to get off, I don't need my fucking playthrough fucked over for it. I'll say that, and then some dickhead will get to typing in the comments about how it's to penalize you for blah 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 bitty fucking blah. Penalize this dick. Penalize me for what? Not always being able to play for hours and hours? As insufferable as I think Dark Souls fans can be, at least in those games which are notorious for demanding your time, with their long tedious boss runs when you die, whenever you need to log out and get something else done for the day, you can do that, and the game will literally put you back where you were with no bullshit. There are no checkpoints because this is a game from the 90s, and that's fair, that's fine, but I think getting sent back to your save point is punishment enough. Don't sit here and fuck with me with these dumbass ink ribbons on top of that. Now, some people will defend this to death. It holds nostalgic, sentimental value for them. But I say again, they don't do this in Resident Evil anymore for a fucking reason. What is supposed to be a tense, limited resource is actually just an exercise in frustration and fucking you over if you're not a psychic able to tell the future. You have zero way of knowing what is coming up and what you're gonna face as you explore, which encourages you to save. But the first game especially is a dick when it comes to ink ribbons and saving. Throughout the course of this series, they take up an inventory slot on top of everything else I just mentioned. What's the problem with that? Two major ones, actually. Let's do some more quick maths for starters. Remember, Chris gets 6 inventory slots total. Remember, the handgun and its ammo take up 2 slots. Shotgun and ammo take up 2 slots. We're down 4 and have 2 left. One healing item, which you should really be carrying around, is another slot. We have 1 left. One key item is another slot, which makes 6. We're already out of space, and that is best case scenario. Worst case is to running into a situation where you need 2 or 3 key items for a puzzle. So you've put up the shotgun or the ammo, or good God, no, not your healing items, and your slots are filled up. Nowhere in this equation does ink ribbons fit into what you should be carrying. You'd have to be deranged to just be running around all the time willy-nilly with ink ribbons filling a slot at all times. So what ends up happening is you put them all up in the item box. Then you'll save as you see fit until you find some more ink ribbons because your space is likely full. Now, they have the common sense to put the ink ribbon pickups in save rooms a lot of times, but also a lot of times you'll just find them out in the world. It just becomes tedious over time to pick them up, go back in some room in the item box, remember to merge the ink ribbons you picked up with the ones you already got in the box, save, put them back in the item box, get your shit back out over and over and over and over. Monotonous shit the game doesn't need. Which brings me to problem 2 with picking them up and them taking up a slot, and that is running all the way back to the item box in the first place. The game wants you to avoid enemies and conserve bullets, when you can, by narrowly dodging things through rooms. That's already its own problem I've already talked about, but that's cool. That fucking falls apart though, when you did it the first time, maybe got lucky, and in the next room you find some ink ribbons. It doesn't matter whether you have space or not. You can't really just trek around with these in your inventory taking up a slot, so you've got to run back through what you just dodged to get here, not once, but twice. Worst case scenario, that could be 5 times. Once to get in there in the first place, once to go back to the box if you don't have space, once to go back through again with your free space, another time to go back through to the box, once again to come back through now that you've put them up. When people say these games are outdated and a chore to try to get into and that they just can't do it, this kind of shit is why. This is why you will likely never see ink ribbons return on a normal standard difficulty in a mainline Resident Evil game ever the fuck again. It will always be some sort of special uber hard throwaway unlockable difficulty the game wasn't primarily balanced around, so it doesn't fucking matter. The game's inventory system itself is designed like you already know what's coming up before it comes up. So if you get to the point where hunters spawn and you didn't bring the shotgun and ammo, since this is the point where you really should probably start lugging around the ammo for it too, which I need to remind you, takes up 4 fucking inventory slots if you still have the pistol on you. So you're probably not carrying around the ammo as a new player, because also carrying around at least one healing item means that you've got one single slot for a key item. And I wouldn't fucking wish playing the entire game like that on Hitler. You're basically fucked. How dare you not know that you needed it? And I can hear the knights coming to the shield now. Well, actually, you shouldn't be carrying around the handgun by the time you get to the hunters anyway. Shut the fuck up. That is not a defense for this. How would you even know as a new player that your B&B weapon that you've been using as old reliable needs to be put up at this point? Reminder, the game is still giving you ammo for the pistol. Or how about not knowing that you will have a boss fight that you will never have any sort of heads up about? Better hope you brought the Magnum and ammo for it. Or the shotgun and ammo for it. Also, better hope you saved before you got here, which you likely didn't because the game just dropped a boss fight out of nowhere in a random room that felt like any other room that you would stumble on. This happens more than once. No, being able to skip the first yawn fight and by picking up the key item does not count as a defense. For starters, you see the crest is guarding for half a second at most, so you'll likely miss it and not even know it's over there until you've already beat this thing. And on top of that, you're not even encouraged to go over here by the way the room is laid out if you have any common sense. To intentionally corner yourself like this in this narrow way versus this wide open circle to fight it in is just about the worst thing you can do in any Resident Evil game. Now, I've torn these games, specifically the first one, to shreds pretty bad, and it is well deserved. Well-earned criticism. Some of the shit these games were doing and continue to do are the reasons that games like Silent Hill, Fatal Frame, Obscure, and other survival horror games were even able to come up because they kept the strengths and eliminated a lot of the weaknesses. Some of them axed the tank controls, others axed the stupid-ass save system, or the tedious inventory, and were able to prosper and come up by being much more digestible to play. That doesn't make them necessarily better than these old Resident Evil games. Clearly, all those games are mostly dead in the water, while Resident Evil has survived by adapting and doing away with a lot of the old frustrations. But there are problems and frustrations to be had here. I think a lot of people that try old survival horror and say that they just don't like it might be misled by Resident Evil to believe that all the games are like the bullshit that Resident Evil puts you through. And the problem might not be necessarily that they don't like old school survival horror, but that they're trying the wrong game. I'm hard on this game because you need to know what you're getting into here when it comes to problems. But there are strengths. I think every classic Resident Evil game tends to start off really poorly and heavy-handed on the player, kind of fucking them if they don't go a specific way first. And it can be just another one of the many reasons modern audiences put these old games down. But just about every Resident Evil game here has an, okay, this isn't that bad, this is actually kind of enjoyable now that I'm adjusting, sort of moment where you start to have fun, and it's typically right around the time you get your first, what I like to call square business gun, your heavy hitter. In most cases, it will almost always be the shotgun. All the bullshit you have to put up with is worth it once you start being able to do this. Then it becomes less of the frustrations of dealing with the old school outdated issues and more of the thinking, decision making, and exploration that made these games such hits in the first place. So, if you're playing these games and you're like, this feels like dog shit, at least get to a shotgun or a grenade launcher. See if you feel a little better with one of these in your inventory. You'll probably find that you're way more comfortable now. And it helps that the feedback for these bigger guns is very good. At least in the PlayStation era. Once we get to later shit like RE0 and Veronica, they start to fumble the bag, but for now, yeah, this feels pretty punchy, and it has the firepower to match. This is about where we'll pick up back in the story too, because you're really just fucking around finding keys and opening doors up until you get here. The goal being to look for Crest to escape the mansion through one of the back gates. Once we do that, we explore a side cabin that's been overrun by something called Plant 42. This is where the character that you choose will matter the most in the game. Like I said before, Chris Redfield in this game is an absolute fucking moron. Plant 42 can actually be weakened with something called V-Jolt before you fight it. And it doesn't matter that he picks up both a document on it and the solution to the problem is written on the goddamn wall. So all this fucking caveman needs to do is read. He can't mix the chemicals to do it. This dude is useless. They could at least give this dude a 10 to 15% critical chance with pistols to reflect him being the best marksman on the squad to make up for how dirty they did him in this game, but to my knowledge, he doesn't have one. It's bullshit. He'll go here, get snatched up, and beg Rebecca for help. And I have to not only suspend my disbelief that she not only walked in here, and the thing with a million tentacles didn't grab her up too, while she had a whole fucking conversation with this idiot, but she had enough time to go make the serum, ruck all the way back to the lower levels, pour it on the roots before it killed him in the 2 seconds it would have taken to do it. Jill, on the other hand, has no such problem. I think even in the worst case scenario, Barry will straight up come in here and help you if you're struggling. This is bullshit, dude. I don't want to hear shit about how men have it easier. Chris is in here getting fucking scammed. When you kill this thing, you get a key to go back to the mansion and run into Wesker again. Barry will leave some supplies for you if you're Jill, and if you're Chris, Wesker leaves them, which is funny because he's the traitor. And by this point, there's realistically no reason to help Chris. He'll be killing STARS members himself in like 30 minutes. Probably said this already, but right around the time these hunters show up in this lower middle stretch of the game is about when the first game's quality starts to dip to me. I do not like the hunters in this game specifically. They're iconic and all that shit, but they are so fucking irritating thanks to the movement and the clunkiness and variables that are completely outside of your control, like what attack it decides to do. If it hit, or even if it missed, that can lead to you taking damage you can do nothing about. And if there's more than one of them and they're not all in the view of the camera, everything goes to shit. Now, I don't like them, it's annoying, but it is manageable. You can deal with it. It is bearable as you run around exploring this mansion a final time. What you're looking for while you're here exploring are MO discs, wolf metals, and a battery to help you get further underground. You'll also have to deal with Yon a final time, putting it out of its misery for good. Everything's cool until you get to the fucking underground mines. Oh my god. The issue here is that just before this, you needed both the battery and the crank to even get here, so naturally, you probably never put up the crank and pushed on ahead. Down here, this place is almost 100% hunters, and there is no fucking item box down here. There's a million things to pick up, and as a further slap in your face, that square crank is now useless because there's a hex crank down here that you'll need to lug around instead. That's in addition to all the other items there are down here to pick up, which you will definitely have almost zero space for, especially as Chris. And these motherfuckers have the audacity to present him with a special flamethrower exclusive weapon to his scenario that takes up 2 slots. If you still have the pistol on you so that you can conserve your ammo and not fucking waste good shotgun shells on zombies you have no way of knowing you won't run into again until you're in the lab, so you don't really need right now, that is all 6 of your slots taken up by the pistol, the shotgun, and this flamethrower with no room for the crank, any healing items, nor the fucking ink ribbons down here, because I need to remind you here, there is no item box. And as another kick in your dick, there's 3 different instances of a boulder rolling to instantly kill you if you don't do the exact, specific thing the game wants you to do to avoid them. 2 of which are before the boss fight that you have to get through. Oh yeah, the boss fight you need to get through that can also poison you and requires you to either pick up the knife the game places on a barrel next to you, which is the likely scenario, or we have the unlikely scenario in which you've been lugging this knife around that was so useless they had to make sure to give you another one so that you weren't stuck here. To sit here and waste another inventory slot that you can't afford to waste in these mines. Some unfortunate soul somewhere had the displeasure of getting fucked by this section of the game, avoiding some hunters to get here, completely unable to save because there is no item box here, and they're out of healing items. And out of space, gotten to this boss, gotten poisoned by the boss with no space for the knife anyway, and decided to run back through and try to make it to one of the item rooms in the mansion. Because again, you have zero way of knowing the item box is behind this door and you need to just desperately make some knife room. And gotten clapped by something on the way there and had to redo this entire section. And likely walked outside, found the nearest pedestrian that had nothing to do with what just happened to them, and likely strangled them to death. You know those YouTube videos you watch about people who commit a crime and there's never a given motive, nothing obvious, and everybody is like, bruh, what made them do that? This is what the fuck made them do that. This section of the game is horrible. It's so bad they had to apologize by making sure the item box is one of the first things you see here in the remake. This is a playthrough motivation killer tier fuck up that can easily make someone never touch this game again ever. Imagine loading this game up just before work to try to make some progress, and then just before you're able to ever really save, you die and lose 45 minutes of progress and you've gotten absolutely nowhere, with no time to both redo all this and make some more progress before work. Uninstall worthy. This section of the game is designed so shitty that they give you the map for the area behind the final of these instant kill boulders. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You beat the fucking area and then it hands you a map that is now useless to you. Shinji, what the fuck? Moving on, we're in the home stretch. We reach the labs, the game's quality shoots back up to about where it was at the mansion. No more instant kill bullshit, no more huntums, an item box as soon as you walk in here, we're good. This act's only real issue is the respawning zombies around some of the rooms that don't do shit but waste your ammo. Like you have no real heads up that you should probably just avoid them because they respawn. And the awful fucking boiler room with the chimeras. These things are arguably worse than the hunters in every way because they do everything they can do, but also crawl on the ceiling. But they're mostly in one area directly before a save room, so you can't be blindsided by running into them. Here, you learn through slides that Wesker is of course the traitor. He's one of Umbrella's head scientists, and through collecting all the MO discs, you can save whoever you didn't play as, be it Chris or Jill, who will also confirm that Wesker has sold them out. This and making sure Rebecca and Barry make it out alive are the only way to get the best endings, which are the canon ones. We run into Wesker here, and depending on who you pick, things go better for him or much, much worse. As Chris, he'll shoot Rebecca. Don't worry though, she's fine. I want to call him a fucking idiot for shooting a STARS member in the fucking bulletproof vest that he knows she's wearing, because he's her captain and knows she's wearing it because he's also wearing it. But listen, hear me out. The man keeps a photo of her in his desk. He's clearly got a crush. He knew what he was doing. This is the same Wesker that was fighting a tyrant himself like 20 minutes before this. He let her live on purpose. Couldn't bring himself to kill her. I will not debate this. It's canon, and if you disagree, you're fucking wrong. He'll then show Chris the game's final boss, the Tyrant. He'll release it to kill Chris, but of course it's a fucking killing machine, so it kills the closest thing to it first, which is him. Chris battles it. Hope you were a fortune teller and knew to bring the Magnum to this fight, because you have no way of knowing. And after putting it down, Rebecca, as I mentioned, turned out to be alive, and sets off the self-destruct sequence. As Jill, Barry actually turns out to be a traitor working for Wesker as well, on the condition that Umbrella has Barry's family and will kill them if he doesn't cooperate. Turns out Wesker is lying though, he's the one that has his family. Wesker doesn't get the chance to show Tyrant to Jill because Barry knocks him out. Jill and Barry decide to investigate the Tyrant Wesker is referring to, and instead of Wesker getting murked, it's Barry who gets a slight slap, and Jill has to battle Tyrant. When she puts it down, Barry wakes up and is fine, and Wesker is nowhere to be found. They also start the self-destruct sequence. I don't really like this scenario's version of this as much, and it's something the remake does a better job with. Here in the original, if you go by Jill's scenario, then Wesker having powers and shit by the time of Code Veronica makes 0 sense, because he never died. He escapes completely unharmed outside of a slight bonk on the head. Pretty lame if you ask me. Regardless, remember to grab whoever you didn't play as on the way out. They'll stay behind with either Barry or Rebecca for a second as you battle Tyrant one final time. Brad, the STARS pilot, will return, hand you a rocket launcher to finish it off for good, and then pick you up in the chopper. Something that will become a series tradition in a lot of these games up until Resident Evil 7 comes and fucks everything up, but we'll get to that later. Like I said, I shit on this game a bit. Actually, a lot more than a bit, Jesus. Because it is the roughest and without a doubt the most tedious to play of the original PlayStation trilogy. And I have to examine these not as a person that already knows what happens, what to do, and where to go, and the solution to any of the fucking puzzles that could block your progress, but as a person that might be going through these for the first time. There's a lot here that has aged horribly, and a lot here that was just poorly designed even for a game from the 90s on a first playthrough. That's alright considering this is their first attempt. They're not going to get everything right on the first go. But flaws are flaws. It's really only on about your second run and up when you kind of know what to expect that you can really have some fun with this game. That's where all these old games really shine. Optimizing your playthroughs, planning which route to take to conserve ammo, or conserve a healing item, seeing if you can go one route or the other to avoid dealing with a specific enemy entirely. On a first playthrough, you can't really do any of that. I don't think it's the worst of the classic games as a whole, but it is the worst of the original PlayStation trilogy without a doubt, because mistakes were made here, like being super stingy with ink ribbons, placing too much ammo in hidden backgrounds instead of in the real world, and the fucking awful middle act of the game, specifically the mines, that won't really be adjusted in design philosophy until Resident Evil 2. Which we will talk about in a second, but there's one more issue I want to talk about real quick, and it's something Resident Evil struggled with through the entirety of the PlayStation 1 era, and that's canon. There's two different scenarios here, obviously, and they don't match up. So which happened? Well, the answer is, it all happened, and you have to just take bits and pieces whenever they want to reference something in a later game. It's a hot fucking mess. 1, 2, and 3 all have different endings depending on either who you choose or what you do in the case of 3. And while at the time I'm sure this seemed like a good idea, in retrospect, when you consider how big this franchise has grown and become one of, if not the most popular horror game franchise in gaming history, this is one of the worst mistakes they made for these games. Asking someone to replay something anywhere from twice to 4 separate times to understand any random reference you might make in the lore is a tall order. The Steam achievements alone will tell you that most people complete these games with either one character or one scenario and they're done. If you've ever wondered why all the differences depending on the scenario were mostly cut in the remakes of 2 and 3, this would be why. To give mostly definitive answers to what each character goes through and unfuck the pre-Resident Evil 4 lore. Now, I'm not going to give you a history lesson on Resident Evil 2's cancelled version because it doesn't really matter and I'm sure you've heard it all before. If you haven't, briefly, Resident Evil 2 started as a sequel that was a hell of a lot more action-packed from the looks of it before it got overhauled for a variety of reasons, and some characters were changed around and reimagined or deleted entirely. Either way, in the end, what we ended up with is an extreme improvement in just about everything the original did. That being said, it still has its issues, one of which being the opening run to the police station. If you ever wonder why this run is shorter in the remake, it's because this game starts pretty fucking brutal and can screw you before you even get in the groove of things. Going through this, I'm going to mostly talk Leon A and Claire B here because let's be real here, most of this fan base is here for Leon, and that's just statistically inarguable. And any notable differences in Claire A and Leon B I'll talk about later. Leon arrives in Raccoon City late to his first day on the job and quickly finds the entire city overrun with zombies. Running into Claire Redfield, sister of Chris Redfield, who's gone missing shortly after Resident Evil 1. They head for the police station but get separated by a zombified truck driver and split up. Leon along the way runs into one of the Kendo brothers at the Kendo gun shop. I can't remember which one this is, but it doesn't matter because he gets murked. I think this one's Robert, but at this point, who cares? Let's be honest, the only reason there's another Kendo brother is because they realized killing this one was a mistake. You can pick up the shotgun early here, but there are far too many zombies for my liking, so fuck that. When he arrives at the RCPD, he runs into Marvin, who was supposed to be his boss. Marvin tells him to get the hell out of here and this city, and Leon needs to find a way to escape. He can't just prance back outside the way he came since the front is swarming with zombies. Now, when I say the game kind of fucks you, this is what I mean. 2 different ways open up after this, and realistically, what you should do is go the way that takes you to the STAR's office, to go ahead and grab the shotgun if you don't have it already. What the game will let you do is go the second way and burn through all your ammo versus an all-you-can-fucking-eat buffet of zombies to completely screw you once you even try to go the other way. If you haven't been killed trying to clear out this sea of zombies with a pistol and no crowd control, then they put a couple of ammo drops this way and a few herbs. Yes, I said herbs instead of herbs, fight me. But there's also a lot of ammo to spend going this way, and keep in mind you still have to kill these zombies to get to the herbs on the other side. There's a fair bit from coming this way, I know that, but my point still stands that, especially factoring in ammo, which you can kind of conserve but will be difficult, and will hinge on you already knowing the layout of the zombies in this room and the trick on how to reset rooms by going in and out. So if you were already in caution to danger before you got here, you could very well eat shit by coming this way. That's not to mention the liquor they throw at you when you decide to head for the STAR's office that can kill you pretty much for the same reason. The health again is placed behind the major encounter with the liquor, so you could very well get hit trying to pick it up if you even see it's here while fighting it because again, fixed fucking camera angles. Now, technically, you don't have to fight this liquor right now. You can speed right past it, but new players are not in this train of thought, especially because the game introduces the thing to you, already jumping in your face trying to kill you. A first aid spray or something to work with when you first get here to kind of reset you back to neutral when you reach the RCPD would have definitely helped this opening be less unforgiving and a deal breaker for new players. Remember, this opening alone put me off of classic Resident Evil games altogether when I was a kid, after playing Resident Evil 4, so I'm not just talking out of my ass. And even if purists are fuming in the comments because I said make the game easier, it doesn't fucking matter because I know I'm right and so does Capcom. Let me explain. See, I have to say again, because it's relevant, I cannot talk about this game in a vacuum and pretend its remake doesn't exist that is far more accessible not only to modern audiences, but just by being easy to buy and play in a couple of clicks. But the remake fixes just about everything wrong here. I already mentioned the run to the station being shorter, but the zombie army hallway in the remake is changed to be the first place you go to. And just before that, you were given first aid, and a pretty fair amount of bullets to work with to get you into the feel of the game here. Even going the direction of the STAR's office, you are not introduced to a liquor face-to-face until after you can pick up the key card to get your shotgun, and the valve to turn to solve the puzzle to even go where it is. Even then, the game goes through careful consideration to tell you it's blind, so that if you haven't picked the shotgun up yet, you can still get through this. To my knowledge, and I sure was looking, I can't find a single note telling you that the liquors are blind in the original anyway, but they are. Now I'm sure somebody is like, well, you should be able to tell because they have no eyes. Motherfucker, this is a game from the 90s on a PlayStation. Everything had no eyes. Have you seen Solid Snake? Not like that matters in this example, because unlike the remake, this game does you dirty by starting the liquor having already spotted you. These changes in the remake are not a coincidence. They are a direct attempt to fix what I'm talking about, and it absolutely was an improvement for that very reason. Regardless, we head to the Star's office and talk to Claire. Chris is long gone, and just about everyone in this police station is dead. Right around here is where you'll likely pick up either the shotgun or the grenade launcher, and here, like I said in Resident Evil 1, is where the game gets good. This is what about these games absolutely still holds up today. That gameplay loop of deciding your fight or flight, handgun for basic zombies, shotgun for bigger threats and crowd control. Hell, sometimes shotgun because wasting one shell on a up-close headshot is more ammo efficient than blowing through most of a handgun clip might be. It's your choice, it's your strategy. Some choices may be more optimal than others, but I feel this game is definitely a lot more fair than Resident Evil 1 is when it comes to ammo and ink ribbons, which unfortunately are still here, and will still be a fucking cancer to this series for quite a while longer, but definitely have been upped in count and frequency encountered. Save points are also not so fucking cancerously far between as they could be in the first game. In addition to that, there's no more the 6-slot fuckery to make inventory management a chore. Each character starts with 8 slots, and the Scenario A character can choose between expanding their space and a powerful machine gun. I recommend giving Claire the side pack because she gets way more shit that's actually practical to carry around. Like a pretty decent bowgun that's not only good for crowd control, but pretty damn beefy if most of his shots land on a single target. I've had it one-shot zombies a lot for that reason. And a grenade launcher with several different ammo types that, unlike Jill's in the first game, can actually be swapped between without emptying the gun. Leon, on the other hand, realistically, you're gonna mostly be running around with a handgun and shotgun and saving the magnum for bosses, so the machine gun is something to take the load off your other resources. Leon also gets a flamethrower that's basically useless once you use it for 10 seconds and the gun is empty. And Claire gets a spark shot that hits like a motherfucker. I know I keep saying this, but they were killing it with these old school weapon sounds. Another thing to mention is the custom parts for guns that Leon can pick up to compensate for him having less utility weapons compared to Claire. A good change, as in the first game Chris got absolutely fucking nothing, to balance out Jill having better shit. Custom burst fire handgun parts, custom magnum parts, and the holy custom shotgun. That can give some of the best shotguns in gaming history a run for their money. That leads me to something that I don't like about this game, and that's the scoring system. I didn't bring this up in the first game because I gave less of a shit there, but here it's necessary to unlock some of the bonus modes. But I fucking despise the old school scoring system. Never mind the idea of revolving the scoring system around speed running your game, rushing through it, ignoring all the art, the atmosphere, and everything just to be absolutely contradicting to the kind of game you're making in the first place. But the fact that you straight up can't use any of these 2 power slot weapons at all, or your score immediately goes down a whole letter is fucking stupid. You made people come into this development studio, spend late nights modeling, designing, and implementing these cool guns, only to then shit on players for using them. Again, it contradicts the whole point of the A and B scenarios that are supposed to link through choices that you make. The fuck is the point of this system where one character gets one thing and the other gets something else depending on what you do if one of the things straight up punishes you? Remember, if you're paying attention near the end of the game, your B scenario character can get either a machine gun of their own or more ammo if you play your cards right as a reward for scanning both of the characters in the lab. Which becomes redundant since you get put on the naughty list for committing the crime of using the reward. Fuck you, this scoring system is stupid and it can fucking blow me. So I played these games my way, To experience what it has to offer and all the little bonus modes that are locked behind this goofy ass system, I just downloaded a save off the web with everything already unlocked. I don't agree with this decision, and I think it was stupid on their part. Once again, I have to reiterate, they know this, which is why they don't do this in modern Resident Evil games. But moving on, eventually Leon makes it out of the police station and into the basement where the Morgan shit is at. Here he runs into the woman he will forever be connected with through the rest of this franchise, Ada Wong. Ada was mentioned in the first game as well, as her and her boyfriend were the passwords to solve a puzzle. But here she is in the flesh. Her voice acting in this game is surprisingly consistent with other actresses in later games. Most of these characters get different actors and entire voice changes, but Ada has been pretty consistent, despite a slew of voice actor changes, given a pretty similar sounding voice outside of She Who Shall Not Be Named. Actually, a lot of the voice acting has been improved for the main characters. Like I said, it's really only the first game that has so bad it's like comical voice acting. That is until Code Veronica happens, but we'll get to that. Ada is here looking for a reporter named Ben that's locked up in jail for trying to expose the corruption going on in the RCPD. Something that will be more relevant in Claire's chapters. She's looking for her boyfriend John, one of the researchers from the lab in the first game. Ben refuses to cooperate but tells the two to get out, they'll need to use the sewers. The next course of action, since this is a Resident Evil game after all, is to collect all the goofy shit like chess pieces, to unlock doors to let us through, a key here, some gears there, the usual. We also get a section where we play as Ada while she looks around before she runs off. Sherry will also have her own playable sections in Claire's scenario. Once we have what we need, Ben gets killed and we fight some weird creature. I forget what the thing is called, I think it's G Adult. The bottom line is, a boss fight with this thing is up next. After we put this thing down, we meet up with Ada again, and Leon goes off on her for running off. So they decide to stick together. Which lasts for all of about 5 minutes before they run into Annette Birkin, who almost kills Ada before Leon takes a whole bullet to save her. Leon's out cold, so we play as Ada again while she chases Annette, who spills the beans on the whole setup. Her husband, William, like Wesker, was one of Umbrella's most valued researchers, who was going under their nose to build a better virus than the T-virus from the first game, the G-virus. Umbrella found out, and he was peppered almost to death when they sent a squad in to steal it. In retaliation, he injected himself with the virus, and chased after them, killing them all. Well, almost all of them. And released the virus into the city accidentally through rats in the sewer, and he's been on a rampage ever since. A fight breaks out and Ada tosses Annette off the balcony before being ambushed by what we will later find out to be a giant fucking alligator that Leon needs to save her from. Pretty cool set piece, I must say. Watching this thing blow into little cute 2D chunks from 1998 is pretty funny. With Leon saving the day, they make for the lab Annette works at. Along the way, we pick up the wholly custom shotgun I mentioned earlier. I can't stress enough how good this thing feels to shoot. This is your reward for all the bullshit these games put you through. I would marry this thing if I could. Ada will unfortunately get injured by Birkin along the way, and you'll need to fight him. With her out of commission, Leon needs to explore the labs looking for a way out by himself. He really just kind of fumbles around here for a little while, solving shit as you do, before he runs into Annette again, who tells him Ada's been playing him and is a spy sent to obtain a G sample. She gets bonked over the head by a random piece of the ceiling, and when Leon confronts Ada and she figures out he has the sample, she turns on him. Annette shoots her and passes out again, and Ada falls off the balcony, apologizing to Leon, who throws the sample down there as well in a fit of rage. In this original version, you can inspect Ada's gun, and it turns out there's no bullets in her gun in the first place, so it's left ambiguous if she would have shot him if she had any. In the remake, she just doesn't shoot him because she can't bring herself to, which I think works way better for their relationship anyway. Either way, devastated, Leon runs into Birkin for his final time, who's transformed far beyond recognition, and mollywops him again and escapes on a train that Claire and a little girl named Sherry has been on. Now, if there's one thing I will say about the original over the remake, it's how the B scenario presents its introduction to you. In the remake, it just fast forwards through the second character's entire fucking introductory cutscene for no reason, and skips straight to the part where Leon and Claire separate. Here in the original, you get the full intros regardless. This version also gives you a short little run to the police station in the B scenario. The remake just kind of starts with the second character arriving there. Another advantage of this is actually fucking explaining the helicopter crash. In the remake, it just randomly crashes into the police station and that's that. Now these are fair benefits, but if you think these are justification enough for a gamer used to today's world to attempt to force themselves to play these, just fucking smoking dicks. Now, most of the B scenario is really just running around doing the same shit you already did in A scenario, just slightly different. I like these games, but I call it for what it is. I'll never understand people who act like this is the best thing ever thought up when it's really just a remix of the A scenario. So in that way, this original and the remake are the same. What actually matters here is meeting the person's companion character and your interactions with them. That's what's mostly different. In Claire's case, that pertains to Sherry. She'll run into Sherry partway through the game and befriend her. Sherry is Annette and William's daughter. The other big change here is the introduction of Mr. X in the B scenario. He's an improved Tyrant model over whatever the fuck Wesker was so in love with that Umbrella uses to blend in as a civilian until it sees its target. At certain moments in the game, Trenchy will ambush your B scenario character. Claire in this case, and you can either put him down or sometimes run. He's going to be the main threat in the B scenario. Claire mostly does the same shit Leon does up until the point where she actually needs to blow a hole in the wall with C4. This puzzle I have a problem with because where you can use the C4 is so finicky that I actually had the spot right and the game told me I couldn't use it. So I was going crazy trying to figure out what I was doing wrong, trying to use the C4 all over the wall only to find out I was right the first time. This is a problem you'll deal with in just about every one of these fixed camera angle games. It wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people get stuck on these because they figured out what to put where, only for the game to not register they're in the spot to use it right. Anyway, she runs into Chief Irons, the head of RCPD, who is clearly a serial killer, having freshly killed the mayor's daughter. And Sherry again. Irons reveals himself to be in Umbrella's pocket, and before he can kill Claire, Birkin offs him. After that, it's a boss fight with Birkin. Claire and Sherry then make their way to the sewers where they get separated, and Claire runs into Annette, who's useless and no help in finding Sherry, which Claire does by herself. They make their own way to the labs where they get separated yet again, and Claire fumbles around doing Resident Evil shit until she runs into Annette again. They see Sherry being chased by Trenchy, and as it turns out, he's chasing Sherry because the pendant she's wearing contains the G sample that Umbrella wants. Claire races to Sherry and throws the pendant in the lava, and like a dumbass dog, Trenchy goes in after it and gets melted. Sherry gets to Annette just after she seemingly killed Ada, and Annette dies from her wounds. With nothing left, they head for a train they found and can use to escape, but before they can get going, Trenchy shows up one last time mutated into a super mutant. Or a super tyrant, so to speak. To give probably one of the worst boss fights in this entire franchise. I said it and I fucking meant it. Horror game boss fights are notoriously terrible. A lot of them don't have dodge mechanics, at least in the olden days. So what a lot of these boss fights amount to is running back and forth, peppering the boss from one corner of the room to the other, trying to run around it before it can swipe at you and tank any damage you take by just hoping you have enough healing items. All the problems I mentioned with the first game about not even knowing a boss fight is coming remain here in just about every instance. But this case is especially stupid because everything is going fine until Ada throws the rocket launcher on the floor here. After that, it is pure luck whether you can even pick this thing up. He is super fucking fast. He has fucking ridiculous reach. And even if you try to lure him away from it so you can pick it up, the character picks it up so fucking painfully slow that if it feels like it, it can just throw out an attack even from across the screen and hit you out of grabbing it. Because your character has no fucking iframes while they pick something up. Picking up the rocket launcher in the first game was nowhere close to this difficult. This fight is fucking awful. Sometimes you can do this and through RNG be completely fine, 0 issues. Other times this thing will burn through every single healing item you have, preventing you from ever picking this up, and there is absolutely nothing you can do. He can be on the other side of the arena and his swipe will track you, even if you try to dodge with this game's shitty tank controls. Need I remind you that you are also on a timer, so even if you beat this thing after he swiped you 1,000,000 times before you can pick up the goddamn rocket launcher, you need to go start the train with whatever time you have left. After this fucking waste of coding is over, Claire gets back to the train and Leon hops on like in a scenario. Only this time there's one final fight. Birkin is back and basically eating the train at this point, so you need to unload all your strongest shit you have left before a cutscene plays where they kill it and things are finally over. As far as A and B differences for each character, the most notable things are what state Birkin is in whenever he's supposed to do something. Birkin might infect the reporter, or he could just bludgeon him to death. He can do the same to Irons. He'll be in one phase or a later one during the ride to the lab. Your A scenario will always have to fight the gator, shit like that. There's also smaller minor changes like Leon actually running into Sherry during the B scenario, or Ada ending up with Sherry's pendant, but they're not all worth meticulously documenting. The biggest changes happen in the lab anyway. A scenario, Claire will be here looking for a cure for Sherry because Birkin infected her with the G-virus. Birkin will kill Annette himself, and Claire will cure Sherry while Ada will be pursued instead down to the reactor since she's wearing the pendant that contains a sample, which will result in her being killed by Trenchy instead. He'll be the final boss of Leon's campaign, which is a lot more fitting considering Ada's the one who throws the rocket launcher to whoever fights him. Like I said, canon here is a mess. Sometimes Capcom acts like Leon A and Claire B happened, other times it acts like Claire A and Leon B happened. They were all over the fucking place back here in these days, and you just had to roll with it whenever they contradicted themselves or changed something. That might be the end of the game, but not quite the end of discussing this game, because there's some bonus modes that are actually worth discussing, unlike the ones in the first game. For starters, we have the most popular and recognized one, the Fourth Survivor. Controversial opinion here, and I don't really fucking care. I hate this mode. It's complete dog shit. One of the members that was sent to steal a sample from Birkin actually survived by the code name of Agent Hunk. He needs to get to the extraction point for evac. Sounds like a cool idea, right? Well, it is one. The issue is it's an unbalanced fucking mess comprised of a bunch of slapped together, cobbled together mobs and shit like this is one of the action era Resident Evil games, and a game this doesn't fit in. It's made to be so hard and intentionally bullshit that it kills you over and over and over until you memorize exactly what is in each room and achieve the perfect run. You get no healing item drops or ammo drops from what I can tell. It starts you with your supplies and you need to make them last until you get to where you need to get to. This mode is unbalanced garbage to me, and I make zero apologies for saying it. You will walk into mobs and mobs of things like zombies and zombie dogs constantly, with no way of even seeing the sheer amount thanks to the shitty camera angles, and dodging is complete fucking RNG. All of the worst parts of these games make this mode fucking irritating. Being stunned like by 12 million dogs they place down a narrow hallway like they're playing No Mercy Mercenaries in Resident Evil 5 or 6 is enough to make me eject these discs and break them into a million fucking pieces with a sledgehammer if I had physical hardware. I have no idea how Hunk became popular because this is a cow shit mode. He's a cool character in RE4's Mercenary mode, so that probably has something to do with it, and probably where most of his popularity comes from, but here, the mode is so shit I just don't care. The much more interesting mode here is Extreme Battle, which is like low-key the grandfather of what we know as Mercenaries mode today. It's got a bizarre setup just to get you going, but I kinda like it. You pick your starting character and your goal is to get from the lab back to the police station and locate some bombs placed around. It's like a zombie-filled Easter egg hunt. Unlike how shitty Fourth Survivor was, this is actually a lot more fair and balanced, like someone didn't just throw it together in 5 minutes. Health and ammo drops, characters with their own unique loadouts and everything. They even have Chris Redfield from the first game as a player character, fully remodeled and upgraded, and it really makes you appreciate the graphical leap from 1 to 2. It's not without the same issues as you'd expect. A lot of time you spend getting fucking hit or grabbed by something will be from something you cannot see that you walked right into. And it's starting to get so fucking annoying dealing with it that I just stopped playing it after a while. But this mode I could absolutely see myself returning to for some fun. And that pretty much wraps up Resident Evil 2. I'd say without a doubt this is the sweet spot for if you wanted to start the series from its earliest release point and still have a decent introduction. I say that after shitting on the literal introduction, but as a game, this is way more fair and enjoyable than one is to go back to today. And it corrects a lot of the mistakes that one made. By the end of the game, I usually had way more ammo than I could ever need in some of the strongest base firepower guns this era will ever have. The problem is, again, I really can't think of a reason to go out of your way for the setup necessary to play this. And the setup necessary to make it look decent when you could easily just save yourself the trouble and play the remake, which is better in just about every way. That's the dilemma I'm facing here, is that I like this game. It's just that I almost never find a reason to return to it when I could just play the remake. I guess that's the nature of remakes, that's what they're designed to do. And Capcom clearly doesn't give a shit about these original games anymore, and I'm a realist, so I can't blame them. I wouldn't either in their position. But if you're thinking of trying it because you're curious, maybe you skipped Resident Evil 1 remake specifically because of the camera angles and controls, and you went straight to the remake of Resident Evil 2 as your first Resident Evil game, give this a try. Since you're already familiar with the flow of Resident Evil 2, stick with it at least until you get your shotgun or grenade launcher or something, and you might find that it hits different. This game is a hell of a lot of fun if you're already broken in by Resident Evil 1 especially. If you can get through that shit, you can get through anything. Or at least that's what I would say if Code Veronica and Resident Evil 0 didn't exist. But as far as just playing the PlayStation trilogy, I think if you can complete Resident Evil 1, you'll be fine. And I think this game, while I'm not going to bullshit you and say it still holds up today to modern games because I don't live in fairy tale land, is actually pretty enjoyable. It's just a lot of fun, and you're free to shoot things way more than you were in the first game because it wants you to play with the weapons and upgrades. A Resident Evil game to me is defined not by some stupid shit like how scary it is, but how replayable and fun it is, and the original Resident Evil 2 absolutely has that, even if its remake is better. And if you can get through Resident Evil 2, I've got some good news. Resident Evil 3 is just as good, if not better, and is actually a little underrated. I think people forget this, but the original Resident Evil 3 used to get pretty shit on in discussions as not being as good as 2. It's actually the same shit the remake of 3 has to deal with. Oh, it's too short, it's an asset flip, blah 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 blah. And I used to think the same way, kinda. I didn't think any of that shit, I just kinda liked Resident Evil 2 more. But that opinion has actually changed. I kinda like the original Resident Evil 3 more than the original Resident Evil 2. Even if a lot of this game is basically just pointless when you think about it. We'll talk about it though. For right now, this game starts us in the thick of the Raccoon City outbreak. It's both a prequel and sequel to 2. It's a prequel until Jill passes out from infection, then it becomes a sequel. But for right now, the city is being fucking bent over. You'll notice right off the bat, this game definitely is a lot more action-packed. A lot of stuff is going to blow up in this game, and it starts you off with Jill flipping out of a fucking exploding building. You know those channels that pretend that Resident Evil just abruptly started packing in more action? They're full of shit. It started right about here. And I'd argue it started gameplay-wise at least around the midpoint of Resident Evil 2, when you're out of the police station for good. Then it became less about avoiding enemies and more about engaging with them with your arsenal down narrow corridors. You'll notice a lot of improvements in this game that Code Veronica will fuck up. This game has a lot going for it. You can walk up and down stairs freely for starters, and so can your enemies. A much needed change. You can have the shotgun the earliest in this game as well, damn near 3 minutes after you get control of Jill, leading to the RE gameplay loop kicking in way earlier than normal. The game starts you with 2 manuals to teach you some of the basics, which both of the previous games never did, and this is the first real introduction to ammo crafting, something that's become a serious staple today. See, even with Resident Evil 2's improvements and toning down of the difficulty of the first game, it was still too hard for a lot of people to get into. I blame that again on the opening of both of those games having so many ways to fuck you over right out of the start. when it came to your resources. So Resident Evil 3 solves this problem with the introduction of the crafting mechanic. With the reloading tool, you can mix and match different types of ammo to craft what you need, when you need it, if you start to run low on something. This is a game changer. It hasn't replaced dedicated drops in the world, it's simply there in addition. It makes one mistake though, and that is how unlocking enhanced ammo works. Enhanced ammo takes Jill's regular guns and makes them way stronger than normal. The issue here is that there are specific amounts of times you need to craft handgun bullets or shotgun shells to unlock it, which makes getting there a chore. It's also at odds with Nemesis drops because we'll get to him, but he'll drop parts for weapons that you can build that are stronger and faster firing than the base guns, but cannot take the enhanced ammo. This is supposed to, add some sort of choice, but in reality, if you decide you like the upgraded hand-up but end up unlocking better handgun ammo crafting, fuck you, I guess, and the same with the shotgun. It was really just a bad idea to design it this way. You should simply unlock the ability to craft enhanced ammo period and be allowed to choose what you want to use it for. But I'll be damned if that enhanced shotgun ammo isn't extremely sexy. Can you tell I love shotguns? I love shotguns. There's also a quick turn now. Oh my fucking lord, there's a quick turn now. Now, I never use it because I'm so used to regular turning, but it's there if you prefer. There's also shit in the environments that you can shoot now to blow up swarms of zombies to save ammo. A good idea, but again, thanks to the fucking camera angles, what can and will oftentimes happen is that if you do what the last few games trained you to do and wait for stuff you hear to come to you in view of the camera, you might often find yourself killing everything only to walk forward and find that there was one of these to help you out the whole time. And it feels shitty. Most importantly, there is a dodge function now, and it's the best thing this game adds. What this does for boss fights especially is a complete transformation. You are no longer just standing somewhere like a fucking dickhead while something swipes at you. And you no longer have to just get mauled to death by things 3 times as fast as you constantly. You can survive off of some skill now. And not just being a psychic and magically knowing to prepare for a specific fight. This will be a thing in most mainline Resident Evil games until 7 comes out and again fucks everything up, but once again, we'll get to that. For right now, know that it is much needed and a good mechanic, but it doesn't always work properly. The amount of times I've dodged something from Nemesis only to get hit any fucking way is too high to mention, and again, I think the problem is a lack of iframes. Why the fuck does it take until Resident Evil 4 to get anything nice around here? A big strength that this game has over Resident Evil 1 and 2 is the weapons. No more of this goofy shit where all your gear is divided between 2 characters. This is a single character's game, and that means a single character gets everything. No bullshit. And I much prefer it this way. Jill has a lot, and I mean a lot of stuff to play with. You can do more shooting and fighting in this game than ever before, and it's the most fun out of these games because of it. I'll quickly mention how Capcom fumbled the difficulty here. Like I said, through Capcom's shitty opening problems, they turned so many people off of this game that they kind of over course correct in terms of the easy mode here. You know me, I don't fucking like it when people tell others they can't play easy mode or try to gatekeep. You want to run through it on easy, that's your business. You do whatever the fuck you want to do. It's your game. But it is an easy mode for sure. You start with an assault rifle and a bunch of shit you really shouldn't have until later progression wise. The mistake is not calling this easy mode. It's an easy mode that does easy mode shit. The mistake is calling the other mode hard instead of normal. Because people will pick easy thinking hard is going to be brutal, but really hard is your standard Resident Evil difficulty. And what the game was built around, Capcom was just being fucking stupid here. The city is now ours to explore. It's probably the most fun location in the classic lineup of games. We run around stumbling into Brad and collecting our arsenal. Eventually running into the game's iconic villain, Nemesis, who kills Brad and introduces us to the game's other main mechanic. I forget what they call it in this game, but it's kind of like a weird QTE RPG system. Think of it as prototype QTEs, in the way that Extreme Battle was a prototype to Mercenaries. I think a lot of people overfluff this up way more than they should, especially when they try to use it as a reason that this game is better than the remake or some shit. Really, 9 times out of 10, it's just a decision between being pursued by Nemesis throughout a location or dealing with, usual Resident Evil enemies in a location instead. The game never really frames it that way to you, and sometimes it appears to do absolutely nothing substantial. Like this time you need to dodge these crates. If you're thinking you're gonna replay this shit specifically to make these choices like this is some kind of RPG and it's gonna dynamically really change the way the game is, you're kind of wasting your time. The only relevant one will be the one you make at the start of the game's final act, which again is kind of stupid because it's all cute and dandy for your different endings, but it's really just a waste of your time and fucks up the lore since one ending is canon, and fuck you if you made the other choice, I guess. Nemesis is the first and probably the best example of a pursuer enemy in Resident Evil games. Not because of some nothing burger reason like nostalgia for him since I have none. Not because he's scary, because that starts to wear off once he starts transforming. But because this is just about the only time they will do this over the course of this entire series outside of Resident Evil 7 and have the common fucking sense to clear out any other enemies in your way that can unfairly fuck you. They also never really have him on your ass while you're trying to move bookcases or something so he can't get on your goddamn nerves. He is encounter-wise designed extremely well. People who try to tear down the remake of Resident Evil 3 overstate just how much he really chases you, and it's really not enough to overstay his welcome in this game. He's pretty scripted himself. You'll progress to a certain area or come back through a certain area, and he's scripted to show up and chase you around a little until you pass through, and then he'll leave you the fuck alone as he should. You can actually walk right back through the area and he'll be gone. Like I said, people look back on him like he chased them from start to finish through the entire game's sandbox, as if that would even be a good thing, when really that sounds like a shitty, unbalanced game to even try to play. But he's actually more laid back than that. You have a choice to fight or run usually, and when you beat him, like I said, he'll often drop custom weapon parts or first aid spray cases. That kind of thing. But the fights are extremely difficult to do, because no matter how good you are, the lack of invincible dodges like Resident Evil 4 has can kinda screw you even if you had the skill needed to read the attack and dodge on time. With that, since I'm gunning for his custom handgun, after about 1,000,000 tries of getting killed, I put him down, and we head into the police station to get a look at it before Leon and Claire arrive. Everything is boarded and quiet, but it's a nice treat. We run around collecting some items and gear before Nemesis chases us out of here and back into the city, and it's around here I start to notice Resident Evil 3's biggest flaw. And that's about the fact that this game's plot is about Jill doing absolutely fucking nothing while trying to escape this city before she meets Carlos in-game. There's no real story or objectives outside of the blanket escape the city before then. And what she needs to get around as far as key items is so silly and ridiculous as to how they're scattered about, it's almost impossible for a game set up like this to ever work again today. If you've ever wondered why Resident Evil 3 has never been done the same anytime it's been readapted, it's because a lot of Resident Evil 3 gives them nothing to really work with. Let me give you an example. Coming to the police station again was cool, but why is she here in terms of story? Well, she needs her lockpick because a random door out of the 6 million doors on this street is locked. So rather than loop around some other building or street in the city, climb past a car, jump a fence or something, she comes here to get it out of her office. Also, she at one point needs gems that go into some carving to open up another passage later. And one of the gems is here in the police station while the other is in a random burning building. Like, why in the world would you not just find a way around this? Why does this even open like this? In Resident Evil 1, you were in a mansion that was a research facility. It makes sense for it to be a little ridiculous. In Resident Evil 2, it's the same situation. Everything you're dealing with is in Umbrella's pocket. The station is a repurposed museum, and a lot of what else you explore belongs to Umbrella. Here, the shit is just obtuse to be obtuse. It's no wonder in the remake, meeting Carlos and getting the game plan for the train is one of the first things she does. Because otherwise they'd be pulling their fucking hair out trying to figure out how to frame this shit, while they try to figure out how to block off all these streets so that this doesn't turn into zombie GTA. Because all this has to be reimagined in a whole new perspective for a modern audience, while keeping its focus on moving forward towards a goal. Once she meets Carlos and crew here, part of Umbrella's sort of personal mercenary task force or some shit, she has a goal to work towards. and a reason to be fucking around like this because she's looking for supplies to fix the train. The most important members of the crew are Carlos, Nikolai, and Mikhail, who's wounded pretty bad. So even though they don't all trust each other, they'll have to get over it for now. The plan is to get the cable car they're in fixed and moving out to get to the clock tower. They'll use it to signal for help, and a chopper will come pick them up. So Jill fumbles around looking for things to fix it, along with the other members who kind of do their own thing for a while. Her and Carlos form a bond. Her and Nikolai, not so much, who's doing shit like killing any other stranded members of his team he thinks may be infected and is clearly hiding something, but Jill's on to him. They get the car up and running, and Nemesis spoils the fun. Mikhail sacrifices himself to slow down Nemesis. They crash at the clock tower anyway, which is mighty convenient, and Resident Evil shenanigans ensue while Jill works to get things fixed. I haven't talked about this yet, but unfortunately this game also has the most annoying puzzles of any game so far. And some dickhead at Capcom thought making them random was a good idea, so there's a few variations to a lot of them. So that looking them up if you're starting to get irritated irritates you even worse. Fuck this marble weight puzzle, and fuck this water treatment puzzle too. Once Jill gets the clock tower running, a chopper shows up to extract them, but Nemesis says fuck that and shoots it down. Now welcome to another one of the worst fucking boss fights ever designed, only to be saved by the dodge mechanic. What fucking baboon at Capcom decided that Nemesis should poison you and make your health completely unreadable? Are you fine? Are you in caution? Danger? Who knows? You sure don't. Oh, and did I mention that Nemesis has a grab attack that can kill you from caution? Yeah, not helped by the fact that getting poisoned makes you animate like you're in caution at all times in these games. So you have no fucking idea. No way of knowing. What the fuck were they thinking? Who played this shit and gave it the green light? I want a name, I want a location, and I want an address. When you finally beat this shit on a plate, you play as Carlos for a little while he tries to look for a vaccine at the local hospital. Carlos's problem is that he won't get much of a refill for his assault rifle, and once you get to the hospital, the hunters make their return. Dealing with the hunters with a pistol is a horrible idea, obviously, so it's crucial you have enough ammo to deal with them, not helped by the game swarming you with a bunch of shit before you even get there that encourages you to burn through a good chunk of your assault rifle ammo. I was running on fumes by the end of this section. While he's here, he also gets betrayed by Nikolai, who kills one of their stranded team members in cold blood and plants bombs around the hospital that Carlos barely escapes from. Using the cure on Jill, they split up, and Jill once again just kind of proceeds to fumble around the city with no plan again. This time exploring a nearby park while she runs into Nikolai again, who gets spooked by our next boss, whatever the hell this giant worm is. Unfortunately, this one kind of sucks because the dodge mechanic can't really be used reliably, and as a result, we're back to running back and forth between the ends of the room, scarfing down healing items anytime you get touched. Then we come up on that choice I mentioned earlier. The quote-unquote canon one is to jump off the bridge so you can be saved by Barry at the end of the game, since he can't stop fucking babying this woman in her own game, instead of pushing Nemesis off. By this point, I'm swimming in so much shotgun ammo, I just go ahead and push the pistol up. I'm talking like 150 plus rounds. Carlos will tell Jill when she arrives that an airstrike has been ordered to completely wipe Raccoon City out to contain the outbreak, so they need to leave ASAP, no Rocky. Nikolai, depending on the ending, will either get clapped by Nemesis just before the next boss fight, or try to escape on a chopper that you can shoot down if you grab the secret rocket launcher. Either way, Jill will have to fight Nemesis in a room where the goal is to melt him to death with the acid valves around the place. Doing that, he gets turned into sludge and thrown down the waste disposal where he can mutate again for one final boss fight, where we need to use a ray gun to blow him away one final time and can finish him off for good. They escape by chopper just before Raccoon City gets bombed, and with that, the story is finished. As far as extra modes, this is the first example of the Mercenaries in Namesake, and it's not very good. Extreme Battle was way better. You play as one of the Umbrella Mercs, and you need to get around to the end before the bomb in your chest goes off. I don't really like the way the time limit works, and I don't really like the way you need to rush to save civilians before they die in places you have no way of knowing they'll be at, or you run out of ammo to work with. It's shitty and not really worth talking about. RE4 is where the real Mercenary starts. You're not missing anything here. And with that, we have one more game to cover in this video, and that's Resident Evil Code Veronica. Unfortunately, is without a doubt the second worst mainline entry Resident Evil game in my opinion, and undoes just about everything Resident Evil improved. Not gonna give too much of a rundown on what happened with this game, but some people say this game was supposed to be the real Resident Evil 3. But others say Resident Evil 3 was always supposed to be made and this game was always its own thing. None of that shit really matters in the end, they're both here. Now, before we get started with this, I should let you know that there's several versions of this game, but only 2 really matter in this day and age. And it's not worth giving you a laundry list of changes between each single one. The old school Code Veronica X on PS2, and the updated Code Veronica X that was released for PS3. If you're playing this on PlayStation 4 or 5 these days, your options are the PS2 version. The HD version comes with improved lighting and shadows and has a darker feel to it, more in line with the later Resident Evil games and the remakes of the previous ones. There's some debate on which version looks the best here, but I'm sorry, some water that doesn't fucking ripple in one room that it will only ever matter in does not justify trading up the HD remaster with improved effects, lighting, and dynamic shadows for the PS2 version where the water just looks worse in general. The real case for the PS2 version is that the controls can be changed similar to that of the first 3 games, whereas the PS3 version is swapped to the PS3 HD version of Resident Evil 4's control scheme, to help keep it consistent with that release with no way to switch back. But it's not too different and you can get used to it. I'm using a PS3 emulator, so if you see a few bugs in the footage here and there, the emulation is 90% perfect, but that 10% of imperfection can still fuck around every now and then. Code Veronica starts as 3 months after Resident Evil 3, with Claire breaking into some sort of base and being chased by soldiers. She's looking for Chris in an umbrella facility in Paris after Raccoon City got wiped. Unfortunately, as good as she is, her luck runs out and she gets captured and brought to Rockford Island in a special prison. The island has come under attack and an outbreak has started, which she smack dab in the middle of, and since the facility is toast anyway, the guard lets her out to do what she wants. Her goal now is to get out of here. Looking around, she runs into Steve, one of the coolest looking characters they've ever designed with some of the worst voice acting you'll ever hear. I don't know what happened, but there are a lot of stinkers in terms of voice actors in this game. He tells us he's an escaped prisoner just like her, and there's an airport on the island that they can use to escape. But he's gonna go his own way for now trying to find it. This is about where we pick up our handgun and we're off to get our Resident Evil journey going. The opening setup for this game is solid, but the actual opening itself is probably the worst it's ever been gameplay-wise. It has both of the issues that made Resident Evil 1 and 2 such turnoffs in their beginning. It has the issue Resident Evil 1 had of the sheer amount of shit that you can pick up and fill your inventory up with before you even get access to the item box. The little metallic drop box in the 3D printer room doesn't count. You're also encouraged to get all your shit out of there anyway, and if you don't, and you leave the wrong stuff in there, it will have dire consequences for later. So you're running around just filling your inventory with shit, some of which you won't need anytime soon, and it's already leaving a bad taste in your mouth. But then, once you open the gate to progress past the prisoner barracks, you can end up going the wrong way to the training facility you don't even need to be at yet to pick up even more shit you really don't need. The only reason to come here right now is probably to get the bowgun and leave. But you could very well not have space for this, or the 2 special pistols, or any healing items if you don't know exactly what to plan for picking up. I counted, and minus the 10 minutes I was fumbling around with the emulator settings, it took about 50 to reach the item box, knowing where it is, and planning for what I would pick up in this playthrough. Though I will say, this game definitely has the best save theme so far. This shit bangs. This game was like an early PS2 launch title or some shit, so this was, for a lot of people, their first Resident Evil game. And it's no wonder this is the game that started to decline this era when this is how it presents itself at first. You know what else was starting to launch around this time? Devil May Cry. See you over there. And if you still needed your horror fix, well, Silent Hill was starting to be the Pepsi to Resident Evil's Coke at this point. Silent Hill 2 would drop a year later. The game also waits way too long to give you your utility weapon for you to deal with bigger threats. You don't get your grenade launcher until you run into the thing that you definitely need it for. We'll get to that later. Now, to help with that, the bowgun can take special arrows to turn the arrows explosive, but you're probably better off saving these things for the massive fucking roadblock of a boss you have to fight later, and that's if you even figure out how to use the powder and what it makes. Because coming off of Resident Evil 3, you might just think it's powder to make more bowgun arrows. Oh yeah, forgot to write in the script, but Code Veronica also does away with the ammo crafting system, so yeah, we're back to that. On top of that, like I said, fresh off of Resident Evil 3, this feels even worse. The game is fully 3D, which is a good change. It's the first of their MT Framework Engine era games, and it allows the camera to slowly follow Claire instead of hard-cutting angles all the time. But switching engines also means a lot of the optimizations they made to allow you to freely walk up and down stairs couldn't be used. That's no longer possible. Enemies can still climb up and down them, but two things can't be on the stairs at the same time. So have fun painfully waiting for a zombie to come up, so you can mash on the button to go down. Also, you know how human beings with brains that function correctly when they playtest shit had to have played Resident Evil 3 and realized that they needed a dedicated button to help with shooting objects in the environment that explode or blow up, because fumbling around with target changing while trying to conserve ammo and precisely target the barrel before something gets so far away from it that it doesn't even fucking matter is difficult without one in this game's shitty camera angles. Well, no one on the team that made this game seemed to think so, because that feature is not in the game. Barrels and explosives return, but hitting them is an exercise in frustration. The dodge mechanic is of course gone, so we're back to the old bullshit of getting hit for free as you fumble around with the fucking controls. So much of this game feels downgraded design and gameplay wise compared to Resident Evil 3 and what it achieved that it's just sad. Like, Claire runs into Steve again and manages to contact Leon and Chris for help. But, while looking around the island some more, runs into the game's villain for right now. Alfred Ashford, one of the last surviving members of the Ashford family, who along with his sister, runs all of Rockford Island. They're both high-ranking researchers in Umbrella, as expected, and he thinks Claire has something to do with whoever attacked the island. This is also when you start to understand just how fucking goofy this game is. Again, some of the worst voice acting since the first game. It's hard to take Alfred as a villain seriously when he talks like this. Especially later in the game when you know what you know about him.
You cross-dressing freak!
He himself is not very threatening. His sister, much more so. We prance around doing our Resident Evil thing for a while until Alfred unleashes one of the worst enemies ever designed on us. The Bandersnatch. These things are fucking awful. Like Resident Evil 1 Hunter bad, if not worse. They don't have their dumb instant kill attack, but what they do have is an arm that can hit you long range. It can also freely jump between floors before you can climb up and down stairs, so if you think you're gonna avoid him that way and be faster than him, bad news, that's not happening. This is a classic Resident Evil game, of course, so have fun walking into a fucking room with the camera pointed where you can't even see anything, only for there to be about 2 or 3 of these things punching you in your face from the other side of the room as soon as you walk through the door. They are fucking irritating, and it's very clear why enemies like hunters will return in later Resident Evil games with more freedom of movement, and these ones will never be heard from again. All this is just before the game gives you a grenade launcher, let me remind you. Once these are introduced, Claire is overwhelmed, and Steve busts in on some Max Payne shit and saves the day. He's clearly taking a liking to Claire and changed his mind about working together. We get to play as him for a little while he clears his way forward with his shiny new machine guns. They then run into Steve's zombified dad, who he fucking loses it on and blows his entire ammo supply like a moron. Turns out, Steve is here because his dad worked for Umbrella and decided to steal from them. And clearly that didn't work out well for him and his family. Both parents are dead now. With that, Claire leaves Steve to grieve and searches around some more. Running into Alexia Ashford, and one Albert motherfucking Wesker, who is clearly not dead and has superpowers. She is no match for this man and almost gets clapped, but Wesker's team radios him for backup elsewhere, so he spares Claire for now. Everything goes tits up when Claire runs into Alexia again, and her and Steve find out that there is no Alexia. Alfred is just a fucking weirdo, running around in dresses and shit and pretending to be his sister.
You cross-dressing freak!
Embarrassed, he sends a Tyrant after the two, and Claire has to deal with it while trying to get a plane working that they can escape on. The Tyrant, of course, is not put down that easily, and returns and is on the plane. And one of the most notorious boss fights in the series ensues. Have you noticed that this era has all the worst boss fights in Resident Evil history yet? Because it does. The problem with this fight is just how easy it is to have soft-locked your playthrough before you even know about it. You have to have enough ammo for this thing or you're screwed. If you killed too much of anything, wasted too many grenade rounds or explosive rounds, you straight up cannot progress past here. And it is very, very easy to end up in this situation. Far easier to screw yourself than just about any other Resident Evil game. You are on an extremely tight leash supply-wise. This thing does massive fucking damage too and can set you up to be hit more than once. So I hope you brought enough healing. He does all the shit you've come to expect out of Tyrant fights now. Tracking lunges in a game with shitty tank controls, the works. Just to shit on you further, you're fighting him in a tiny cargo bay that is essentially just a square. With one end open because the gimmick of the fight is to do enough damage to weaken him and hit him with cargo and knock him out of the plane. If he hits you while you're on the wrong side of the room, he'll knock you out and kill you instantly instead. This fight alone is the death of a lot of playthroughs for this game. And I'm glad I didn't get into Resident Evil until 4 because I would have been fucking furious if this happened to me. Those BOW rounds that the game gives you actually do extreme damage. Save them for this fight at all costs. Though, since the game barely fucking makes it clear the differences between this and the other rounds in terms of sheer damage, you'd be forgiven if you used them earlier. Putting him down for good, they try to escape, but Alfred takes control of their plane remotely and forces them to land at another Arctic facility, one that he also owns. They begin looking around for a way out of here too. Also, as another middle finger to you, I hope you decided in your quest to save space at the beginning of the game, where there was no fucking item box, to go back for the fire extinguisher after you emptied it and used it. And likely dumped it and left it in the deposit box, because if you didn't, fuck you, no Magnum for the entire game. Unbelievably shit game design. They run into Alfred again, and sick of his shit, Steve caps him. That also releases Ashford's father, who they locked up and experimented on for years, and has turned into a monster. The game also fucks you in that right after this happens, you better save and prep for a boss fight, because if you pick up Alfred's rifle, since it's glowing and shining at you, you're taken straight to the fight. Though I think, in a rare case of common sense, they give the first ever series checkpoint just before this fight after going back and realizing that they fucked this up. Now, this is a game from literally the year 2000, so aiming the sniper is a pretty shit experience. But it's doable to get at least a couple of shots in his heart and do some heavy damage. They then make their escape only for it to turn out that not only is Alfred alive, but there is an Alexia after all, who's been asleep for years and has powers of her own. And she is not too pleased with what she's seeing after waking up. So she personally snatches Steve and Claire right the fuck back up and brings them back. We then take control of Chris Redfield, who's reached Rockford, and this fucking idiot drops his gear before making it up top. I see he is still stupid as shit. And for the second half of the game, we'll be playing as him. It's good to see your boy back in action. He's been out of commission since the first game. You can save the guard from the beginning of the game if you've given him his medicine as Claire, and haul ass when he gets grabbed here long enough to give Chris his lighter before he dies. And you'll score another 2 SMGs out of it. Chris's half of the game is actually way better and has a way better start than Claire's. It's crazy how the simple act of making sure to give the player a fucking item box close to when they start can improve things dramatically. Now, I know the game also kind of fucks you by not giving you any indication that you'll even be playing as Chris here, so you likely won't prep and leave him anything on your first run through, but it's actually not that bad. Chris gets plenty of ammo and his own toys during his half of the game. Anything you leave in the item box is just extra. The biggest thing that happened around this time is Chris learning Claire's location at the Arctic base, and learning that Wesker is still alive and ain't exactly human anymore. This is when the iconic Wesker versus Chris beef really started to kick off. Chris flies to the Arctic base and searches around for Claire. Like I said, hope you have the fire extinguisher, cause if not, no Magnum. Alexia is also at large running around here. Alfred is dead as shit. And there's a cool replica of the Spencer mansion that the Ashford mansion is based on. Finding Claire and freeing her, they separate, and Claire runs off to go find Steve. These are the game's final moments, and you better believe they fuck up almost everything from here on out. This is the last time you'll be playing as Claire here. But the game gives you no indication of that. So, if you take anything good with her, thinking perhaps you might be swapping back to her for a while, she might get her own final boss fight, something crazy. Wrong. And fuck you, I guess. She's playable shortly while she searches around for Steve. And completely ignoring how dumb the idea of a crushing ceiling that requires precise timing and quick movements in a game with fucking tank controls is, when we get to Steve, he's a goner. Alexia's infected him and he transforms into a monster. This will become a recurring theme for Claire, as any man she likes ends up just like this throughout the series. Poor girl. Anyway, we are then blessed with, again, one of the worst. I know I keep saying this. You'd have to see it to believe it. But yes, again, one of the worst set pieces I have ever seen. You might think I'm exaggerating, but no. When I say ever, I mean ever. What the fuck were they thinking? How did they play this and think this was okay? There is almost nothing you can do to avoid getting hit here. You need, not should, but need to have at least 2 or 3 healing items to get through this chase. Steve will hit you about twice. There is nothing you can do. And if Steve hits you twice from full health, you are dead. Let alone if you walked in here with your health not maxed out. This is fucking stupid. Now, you can't save once the game gives you control of Claire, because if you start playing as Chris and you gave everything to Claire, you have nothing to defend yourself with for what's coming up next. So the game, in a rare instance of not being a fucking jackass, won't let you save here so that you don't lock your playthrough. But in doing so, that means that anytime you die during this section, you have to redo everything again. Crushing ceiling, all of it. I cannot believe they made this section this way. It is awful. Even Mutant Steve can't bring himself to kill Claire, so Alexia kills him in retaliation, and you feel bad for them. Sphere Hunter is a fucking hater. These two go great together. Claire clearly likes to be the smart one and in control in her relationships. And she likes her dudes to just be a little dumb and follow her lead, and Steve has all that in spades. These two deserved better, and he's much better for her than whatever boring dude she'll be fucking in Revelations 2. Meanwhile, as this is going on, Wesker and Alexia start fighting in front of Chris, and clearly as strong as Wesker is, Alexia ain't no slouch either. Wesker nopes the fuck out of there and leaves, dealing with her to Chris, who puts her down and rushes to find Claire still devastated. They set the facility to self-destruct so that all the locks in the facility will open up and they can escape. Alexia ain't letting that happen without a fight, and Chris fights her while Claire finds a plane out of here. I can't believe I gotta say this one last time. This is without a doubt not just the worst boss fight in the classic era, but the worst boss fight in this entire series. Nothing you have fought or ever will fight in any other of the fucking 10 to 15 games there are left in this series will ever come close. Look at this shit. Look. Stunlock City. I'm armed to the fucking teeth and none of it matters because of these fucking larvae Alexia shoots. Did I mention she also has an acid attack she can shoot to poison you and turn the fight into an even worse version of RE3's clock tower fight? Or how about her tentacles that track the whole stage and are damn near impossible to avoid? This is one of the worst bosses I've ever fought in my life. And I'm 27. I've been gaming for quite a long time. Everybody responsible for it deserves life in prison with no possibility of parole. When you get past that, oh, you better believe you have one last plate of shit shoved in your face. Alexia begins flying, and you need to take this launcher and hit her with it. Did I mention she constantly dodges these attacks and shoots fire at you? Killing her, our reward for slogging through this shit, is one of the best fights in the entire series. Pre-steroids Chris versus superpower Wesker. And it's brutal. Chris gets his ass beat mercilessly. It's rough. Pretty fucking rough. The only thing that saves him is Wesker getting badly burned by the facility self-destructing before he can kill Chris. And with that, Chris makes for the plane and he and Claire escape into the sunset. As far as this game's Merc mode, there isn't much to talk about. It's a gauntlet all the way to the final fight with Alexia. And that fight is fucking awful, so I have no interest in this mode. It would have been way cooler to fight, stairs, fire Alexia at the end of this mode instead. You also have infinite ammo the whole time, so there's just nothing going on here. Resident Evil Code Veronica is still a Resident Evil game at heart, and so that means that once you're on your second playthrough and up, and know what to expect, you can have a lot of fun with it. The problem is just that the first playthrough and all the bullshit, the got you moments, the poorly thought out things it does, can be so irritating on your first playthrough because there are just so many ways to fuck yourself over that this game sent Resident Evil as a series to the hospital clinging on for dear life. Other horror games were doing things better, and just about everything that you will stereotypically hear someone say they don't like classic Resident Evil games for, this game does twice as bad as anything in the PS1 era. I know I gave Resident Evil 1 especially a pretty hard time, but that is still better than some of the shit this game makes you suffer through, if you don't do exactly what the game expected you to do. When I look back on this game, the thing that sticks out to me are how cool the moments with Wesker are whenever he's on screen. He is the highlight of this game, and he and Chris have to carry this game on their fucking backs. They're the highlight of this game and just about the only reason this game is really even relevant to the lore, because this leads directly into their beef in Resident Evil 5. This game is in need of a remake to clean all this shit up pretty bad, but you can tell Capcom just straight up does not give a fuck about this game. There's still hope for a remake. Word on the street is the name of Capcom's next-gen take on the RE engine is called the Rex engine, as in REX. But even then, like I said, in my look at the Resident Evil 4 remake, they blew the load by releasing that first, instead of a remake for this game. Resident Evil 4 turns all the knobs up, and completely overhauls the series into what you would expect any modern game to play like today, and plays much better and much faster. It will always be a part of the formula for Resident Evil that is shown to be much more popular, and going back to Code Veronica where shit is slower would have really worked better going from the remakes of 2 and 3 than the whiplash of going from 4 to Code Veronica, and then back to 5. Because Code Veronica remake will undoubtedly sell less. Like, there's no question about that. That's not debatable. That's extremely predictable. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not worth remaking it, but some things just are. If they never remake this game, the closest you'll ever get to one is this HD re-release. And if that's the case, they might as well just re-release this re-release with like updated, resolutions and shit. That would be cool. They could do the same modern control thing to get newer players into it that they do with, the Origins collection. I think it would work out really well. And it would also give classic Resident Evil fans another game to kind of stay relevant in modern Resident Evil as a whole. Because right now, all they got is Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1 remake. There's something to say about the only two classic era Resident Evils left that are still relevant to the lore being the two worst in the franchise by far. But hey, that is what that is. And with that, I think we're done for this video. I'm going over most of the entire RE series, but I want to separate these videos by era. I consider these 4 to be the end of a bygone era. One Capcom doesn't really care for anymore and doesn't actively push. 3 out of 4 of these games have been remade, and the 4th is just a complicated situation. Capcom makes no attempt to sell these, the PS1 era games especially, and that leads me to question if these are even worth it. They don't want you starting here. Ideally, they want you starting with the Resident Evil 1 remake. But realistically, they know today's market is likely going to start with a remake of Resident Evil 2, which is more digestible and accessible of a way to get into Resident Evil today. So is it really worth it? I mean, I'm going to piss people off when I say this, but realistically, no. At least not to force yourself through. I think if you can keep an open mind and you're tolerant of some of the issues, and you can get through Resident Evil 1 and still be on board, I think you'll find that these games still have charm. They still have merit, and if you lower your expectations a bit, you really can have a good time with them once you find your rhythm. I enjoyed my time here, especially with Resident Evil 2 and 3, but it's a hard ask. A very, very hard ask, especially today. And most people today simply won't be replaying these the same way they replay 2 and 3 remake. And if you just can't do it, you don't have to force yourself anymore like you used to back when I was a teenager. There are more modern versions of every single game here besides Code Veronica. And that game sure as shit is not the place to start in the 2020s if you're trying to win over anybody with Resident Evil. So yeah, controversial take here. Are they worth checking out if you're curious? Sure, but they're not really worth forcing yourself through if you're already dreading it and just not feeling it after trying Resident Evil 1. Even if I do think 2 and 3 make up for all of 1's shortcomings. Code Veronica, I guess you're just kind of stuck out for right now. But you really weren't that great anyway. Up next, we'll take a look at the new starting point for the series, and one that's done a little work to be more modern. The remasters of the Resident Evil 1 remake and Resident Evil 0. Or as Capcom refers to, by era now, the Resident Evil Origins collection. I'll see you next time.